Day 0. Sometime around noon, I think. I'm recording this because I don't know what else to do with my hands. That sounds stupid, but I've been a civil engineer for 12 years, and every time something goes wrong on a job site, the first thing you do is document it, write it down, get it on record. So here I am in my grandfather's basement, except it's not a basement, it turns out. It's something else entirely. Holding a flashlight in one hand and this recorder in the other, listening to sounds I can't identify coming through about 4 feet of reinforced concrete above my head. My name is Garrett Holt. If anyone ever hears this, that's who made it. I'm 34 years old. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. Originally, though I've been living out of a work truck for the better part of 3 years, following irrigation and infrastructure contracts up and down the Mid-Atlantic corridor. I don't have a wife. I had a girlfriend named Pam, but we ended things in February, and I still have her coffee mug in my passenger seat, and I don't know why I'm mentioning that, except that right now every stupid little detail feels like it matters, like it's all connected somehow, like the fact that I still have her mug and haven't thrown it out means something about the kind of person I've been. I'm in my grandfather's bunker. That's the actual thing I'm trying to say. I didn't know it existed until 4 hours ago. Let me back up. I came to Pop's farm 6 days ago. Pop is Eugene Holt, my father's father, 73 years old, built like he was carved out of the Blue Ridge foothills and left in the sun to cure. He's got about 240 acres of working farmland outside a small town called Creswick in Western Virginia, which nobody outside of a 40-mile radius has ever heard of. I've been to his farm maybe a dozen times in my adult life, which sounds like a lot, until you factor in that he lives 40 minutes off the interstate and has no interest in the internet, no functioning microwave, and a telephone that still has a cord attached to the wall. We've never been close. I want to say that plainly. My father and Pop had a falling out when I was 9 years old, and I only found out some of the details when I was in my 20s, and my father, after his 3rd beer, would sometimes let things slip. Something about land. Something about a decision Pop made without consulting anyone. My father moved us to Asheville and didn't speak to Pop for almost 4 years. And when they started talking again, it was careful, the way you talk to someone you've decided to forgive, but haven't actually forgiven. I grew up with a grandfather who called on birthdays and came to my college graduation and shook my hand. That kind of relationship. When my company won a contract to assess the irrigation infrastructure on 4 farms in the Creswick area, old gravity-fed systems built in the 50s, most of them failing in various ways, I noticed Pop's farm was in the coverage area. I sent him a letter, the way you do with him, and he wrote back that yes, his irrigation was a problem, and would I be coming to look at it. So I came. He'd made beef stew the night I arrived. We ate at his kitchen table, and he asked about my work, and I asked about the farm, and neither of us mentioned my father, who has been dead for 3 years now. Pop's wife, my grandmother Edna, has been gone for 11 years. So there was a lot we didn't talk about over that beef stew, which mostly meant we talked about the state of the east pasture drainage, which had apparently been a problem since 2019. The first 5 days, I worked. That's what I'm good at. I walked his fields with my survey equipment, mapped the existing channel network, took core samples near the main intake structure, noted the places where the clay substrate had shifted and caused blockages. Pop came with me most days and didn't say much, which I appreciated. He's not a man who talks to fill silence. I've always either found that quality infuriating or comforting depending on my mood, and that week it was mostly comforting. I was supposed to leave on a Thursday. That was my plan. Finish the assessment, spend Wednesday evening eating whatever he'd cooked, drive out Thursday morning and file my preliminary report by Friday noon. The Thursday I planned to leave was the day all of this started. I know that now. I didn't know it then. What I knew then was that something was wrong with the radio. Pop has an old radio in his kitchen. Not old like antique, just old like he bought it in 1987 and has never felt the need to replace it. It's a transistor model, dark brown plastic, sits on the counter between the toaster and the window. Most mornings he has it on while he makes eggs. tuned to an AM station out of Staunton that plays a mix of country and farm reports and local news. I came downstairs that Thursday morning at about 6:45, and the radio was already on, but it wasn't the usual station. It was static with something underneath it, a voice cutting in and out, and Pop was standing at the counter not cooking anything, just standing there with his hands flat on the countertop, listening. I said, "What station is that?" He held up one finger without turning around. "Wait." The voice came through clearly for about 4 seconds. Residents of Shenandoah and Augusta counties are urged to remain in their homes and avoid contact with, and then static, and then it was gone. Pop turned the dial slowly, searching, found another station, this one clearer. A woman's voice, professional, reading something off a sheet. Reports of violent attacks in multiple jurisdictions overnight. State police are asking residents in the affected areas to... Pop clicked the radio off. I said, "Should we be..." "Sit down," he said. I sat down. He didn't sit. He stood at the window, looking out at the yard and the barn and the field beyond it, and I watched his face for some clue about what was happening. And he was doing the thing he does, where he's clearly already made a decision and is just waiting for the right moment to communicate it. That took about 90 seconds. Then he said, "We need to call Ray and Floyd. Ray Dempsey is his nearest neighbor, a mile and a half down the road. Floyd Ackers lives 3 miles in the other direction. Both of them have been farming this area for decades. Both of them have known Pop for most of his adult life. I'd met Ray twice and Floyd once, at various points over the years." I said, "What's happening?" "I don't know yet," Pop said, "but I've seen what comes before it." That was all he would say. He went to the wall phone and called Ray, and I stood in the kitchen doorway listening to a conversation that went, yes, they'd heard it too. Yes, Ray's scanner was picking up things. Yes, Ray's son Tommy was visiting from Richmond, and they'd both be over within the hour. Then he called Floyd, shorter conversation. Floyd was already in his truck heading over. I went upstairs and pulled up the news on my phone. It was bad. Not bad like, not a thing you could process cleanly. The news sites were updating every few minutes, headlines shifting like they couldn't figure out what to call it. Something had happened in several cities overnight. Richmond, Charlottesville, Harrisonburg. Reports of violent assaults, victims attacking others, hospitals overwhelmed. The CDC had issued an advisory that read like it was written by someone who was scared but trying not to show it. Social media was moving so fast I could barely read individual posts before they were buried. Videos that autoplayed before I could stop them. Blurry, shot sideways, people running, people screaming, something moving wrong in the background of a gas station parking lot, moving like a person but not quite, the gate off in a way I couldn't name. I sat on the edge of the guest bed for a while. My phone was at 42%. I plugged it in and stood at the window looking down at the barn. The morning was completely normal. Dew on the grass, crows in the far tree line, the east pasture just sitting there, needing its drainage assessed. Then I heard Pop's truck start in the yard. I took the stairs 2 at a time. By the time I got outside, he was pulling around to the barn doors, and I jogged over, and he already had the barn doors open and was starting to load things into the truck bed. "Get in the barn," he said. "Anything in there that could seal water or store food, anything metal that's solid, start passing it out." I said, "Pop, where are we going?" "Not far." He was moving fast for a 73-year-old. Faster than I expected. "I need you to trust me for about 2 hours, Garrett. I'll explain everything once we're situated. Right now we're loading this truck. I'm a person who needs information to function. I'll be honest about that. I don't do well with trust me, and I'll explain later. It's how I'm built. The engineer brain. The need to understand load-bearing conditions before I commit to anything. So standing in that barn at 6:58 in the morning, while bad news loaded itself on my phone upstairs, what I felt was a very specific kind of anger at not knowing what was happening. But I looked at Pop's face, and whatever was in it, not panic exactly, something older than panic, something that looked like recognition, I started hauling things out of the barn. Ray arrived 40 minutes later with his wife Donna and their son Tommy. Tommy was maybe 27, worked in IT in Richmond, wore a long-sleeve flannel shirt despite the warm morning, and shook my hand with the grip of someone who's been told to give firm handshakes and has never stopped consciously doing it. His face was the color of old candle wax. I noticed that, and then didn't think about it again, because Floyd arrived 6 minutes later with his wife Beverly and their teenage daughter Irene, and there were suddenly a lot of people in Pop's yard, and Pop was giving instructions. "There's a root cellar behind the house," Pop said, and then he paused, and something moved across his face. "There's more than a root cellar. I'll show you. But first, we load what we can." It was organized chaos, and it lasted for 3 hours. We stripped Pop's pantry and his 2 chest freezers in the mudroom. We took 4 50-gallon drums of diesel fuel from the barn, wrestled them onto the truck's flatbed with a come-along winch. Tools, every hand tool Pop owned, plus 2 chainsaws, plus a generator that Floyd had in his own truck, first aid supplies, Pop's gun cabinet, which held 2 hunting rifles, a 12-gauge, and a .22 pistol, plus ammunition that Pop had stored in an old ammunition can that I'd always assumed was decoration. Rain gear, rope, 2 propane tanks, a case of motor oil, 3 boxes of candles Pop had in the closet off the mudroom, the big utility candles, the ones that burned for something like 70 hours each. Donna kept asking what was happening. Ray kept telling her to just grab things. Tommy stood in the yard for a while looking at his phone, then put it in his pocket and started helping without being asked, which I noted because it told me he'd seen something on his screen that made helping seem like the right thing to do. Beverly cried for about 15 minutes in the kitchen and then stopped and got very practical. I liked Beverly. Irene, the teenager, didn't cry, just moved fast and didn't talk, which I found almost more unsettling than the crying. At 9:40 in the morning, Pop locked the farmhouse door, the farmhouse he'd lived in for 40 years, and didn't look back at it. "This way," he said. "The root cellar entrance is behind the house, set into the slope of a low hill that runs along the back of the property." I'd walked past it 100 times that week on my way to the east pasture. It's got a wooden door, heavy, painted red at some point but mostly just gray and weathered now. There's a padlock on it that looks original to the door. Pop had the key. Of course he had the key. But here's where it gets strange, where it turns into something different. He opened the root cellar door, and there was a root cellar. Dirt walls, wooden shelves, some canned goods, a bag of seed potatoes that had gone soft. Normal root cellar. He went inside and we all filed in after him. Ray and Donna, Tommy, Floyd and Beverly and Irene, me at the back, all of us shoulder to shoulder in this dark, dirt-smelling space that was maybe 8 feet by 12. Pop went to the back wall. It's a wooden shelving unit, full of canned goods. He reached behind it on the left side and did something I couldn't see. Heard a click, some kind of mechanical release, and the shelving unit swung outward on a pivot, not smoothly, heavily, the way something moves when it was built to last, rather than to impress. Behind it was a steel door. Plain gray steel, industrial grade, with a wheel handle in the center like something off a submarine. Not decorative, not designed to look like anything, just a door built to hold. "Eugene," Ray said. His voice was very quiet. "I know," Pop said. He grabbed the wheel and turned it. It took both hands and some effort. He had to lean into it, and then there was a sound like air pressure releasing, a deep thunk of heavy bolts drawing back, and the door swung toward us. Beyond it, concrete stairs going down, darkness. And rising out of that darkness, faint but unmistakable, the smell of diesel exhaust and old metal, and something chemical that I'd only ever smelled once before, in a pump station I'd assessed in Roanoke 2 years ago. Generator exhaust, old ventilation, a space that had air moving through it, mechanically, probably for years. "There's power?" I said. "There should be," Pop said, "if the battery bank hasn't gone flat." He went first. We followed. The stairs went down 18 steps, and then opened into a room that was... I can't explain what it felt like to walk into it. It was the size of a large garage, maybe 1,000 square feet. Concrete walls, concrete floor, concrete ceiling, with exposed conduit runs, and a row of fluorescent lights that flickered on when Pop found the switch on the wall. In the far left corner, a diesel generator, medium-sized, the kind you'd put in a commercial facility, bolted to a concrete pad. Along the right wall, metal shelving, industrial grade, most of it empty, but some of it with supplies. Pop had clearly been restocking quietly over years. Canned goods, water containers, plastic-sealed boxes of various things I'd have to inventory later. 2 folding cots, collapsed. A workbench, a steel filing cabinet, a door in the far right wall that led, I would discover, to a bathroom with a composting toilet, and a hand pump water system, and a small gray water tank, and a radio setup, not a little transistor radio. A real one, a shortwave transceiver, an HF set with an external antenna, the kind that could reach out hundreds of miles under the right conditions, mounted on a dedicated desk with a notebook beside it and 2 pencils. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Floyd said, "Eugene, how long has this been here?" Pop was checking the generator. He crouched beside it in a way that said he knew exactly what he was checking and where everything was. "A long time," he said. "Help me get these fuel drums down the stairs." Day 1. Late evening. We've been down here for about 9 hours. The generator is running. Diesel. And we have those 4 drums plus what was already in the tank here, which Pop estimates gives us roughly 3 weeks of power if we're careful about it. We're rationing it to 12 hours a day. The fluorescent lights are off now. We're using a battery lantern, which throws yellow light across 7 faces that all look wrong in it. Everyone's wrong tonight. Donna keeps touching her phone even though there's no signal down here. Ray is sitting very straight like he's waiting for a meeting to start. Tommy ate half his dinner and then went to the back corner and said he had a headache and lay down on one of the cots. Floyd built the second cot and Irene claimed it without asking, which nobody argued with. Beverly found a stack of old wool blankets on a high shelf and distributed them. I've been going through the filing cabinet. Pop came over and watched me for a while, leaning against the workbench, and eventually said, "There's a full inventory on the top sheet." There is. It's handwritten, in Pop's handwriting, on yellow legal paper, dated, and this is the part that made me stop and look at him, dated June of last year. Meaning he updated it 12 months ago. Meaning he's been keeping this current. Inventory as of June last year, 72 cans of various goods, beans, soup, corn, tomatoes, peaches, 40 pounds of dried rice in sealed buckets, 28 pounds of dried beans, also sealed, 12 MRE packs, military issue, expired but still usable, 12 gallons of water in sealed containers, a hand pump filter that will process contaminated water from the ground well. There's a hand-dug well shaft in the bathroom floor, capped with a rubber seal, about 30 feet to the water table. Basic medical kit, 100 pack of ibuprofen, 2 boxes of generic antibiotics, amoxicillin, 500 milligrams, and a variety of other things. Bandages, a suture kit still in its original packaging, antiseptic wash, 4 ace wraps. 7 people now in this bunker. 4 adults I'd call fully capable. 2, I'm less sure about. Tommy is clearly unwell for reasons I haven't sorted out, and Beverly is functional but right on the edge of something, and 1 teenager who might turn out to be more capable than anyone gives her credit for. I asked Pop to explain what this place is. He said, "I will, tomorrow." I said, "It doesn't have to be tomorrow. It could be now." He looked at me for a long time, with that expression that used to make my father furious and just makes me tired. The expression that says, "I have reasons, and they are sufficient." "Tomorrow," he said. "I'm turning off this recorder. The generator cycles off at 10, and I want to be awake when it happens to check the ventilation system. The mechanical fan should continue running on the battery bank, but I want to confirm that before I try to sleep. Before I click off, there's a sound from above us. Not loud, not close, but there's something up there, moving, and it's not the normal sounds of a farm settling at night. I know the difference. I've been in enough rural structures at night to know what's footfall and what's foundation movement. That's footfall. More than one set. moving slowly around the farmhouse. Sleep well, Garrett. Day 2, morning. The ventilation held overnight. I checked the battery bank at 10 p.m. when the generator went off, and again at 6 a.m. when I turned it back on, and the readings were in the range I'd expect for a properly maintained lead-acid system. Whoever installed this thing was serious. Whoever installed this thing knew what they were doing. I know who installed it. I'm starting to understand that. Pop made breakfast on a 2-burner propane camp stove he'd apparently had stored on a shelf under the workbench. Oatmeal from a stored can, reconstituted with water from the hand pump. Honey from a glass jar. The kind you get at a farm market with the paper label and the twine bow. We all ate sitting on whatever flat surface we could find. The cot edges, the floor, the chairs from the workbench. Tommy didn't eat. He said he still had the headache, and his stomach was bothering him. He was lying on his side, facing the wall. Ray put a hand on his shoulder and asked something quietly, and Tommy said he was fine. Give him an hour. Ray looked at me. I looked at Ray. After breakfast, I went outside for exactly 4 minutes. I want to be clear about this decision. I went up the stairs and through the steel door and through the root cellar and pushed the wooden door open just far enough to look out and assess. 4 minutes. No further than the door frame. The morning was overcast. The sky was the color of old dishwater. Pop's farmyard was visible through the gap. The barn, the truck we'd loaded, the corner of the house. Everything looked the same as it always does, except for 2 things. 1. There were 3 of them at the far end of the yard, near the fence that borders the east pasture. 2 men and what might have been a woman, hard to tell, wearing torn clothing, standing with a kind of loose-limbed stillness that looked like someone had turned the animation off, not looking at anything specific, just there. 2. There were tire tracks in the soft mud of the driveway that weren't our tracks. Someone else had come through. Recently, given the rain overnight hadn't filled them yet. I went back down. I told Pop what I'd seen. Without interrupting. The tire tracks concern me more than they do, he said, meaning the people in the yard. They, I said. You know what they are. I have a guess. What's your guess? He picked up his coffee mug. He thought for a moment. Then he said, there was a project, back in 1987, before your father and I. He stopped. Before a lot of things. I was brought in as a civilian engineer on a government emergency preparedness contract. Rural Virginia, not far from here. About 40 miles south of Creswick. He stopped again. In the yellow light of the lantern, his face had aged since yesterday. He looked 73 this morning in a way he hadn't looked 73 before. They were testing containment protocols, he said. For a biological incident, they brought civilian engineers in to build the infrastructure, water rerouting, drainage, temporary structure foundations. Nobody told us specifically what the containment was for. You learn not to ask when there are people in those kinds of uniforms walking around. I said, what happened? The protocol failed. It was supposed to be a small-scale trial. It wasn't small by the end. He set the mug down. I was there for 6 weeks. When it was over, they debriefed us, classified everything, gave us all papers to sign. I signed them. Pop. What I saw then, he said. What the victims looked like. How they moved. He paused. I've spent 37 years hoping I was wrong about how it would spread if it ever happened again. The room had gotten very quiet. Ray was listening. Floyd too. Beverly had put down her oatmeal. You built this bunker because of that, I said. Edna thought I was... He almost smiled. She thought I'd lost my mind. I finished it in 1994. I've been restocking it every year since. Pop. What exactly happened in 1987? What were they containing? I don't have a clean name for it. We weren't told clean names. He picked up the coffee mug again and held it in both hands. People became violent. Then they died. Then they didn't stay dead. That's the short version. Floyd said, very quietly, Lord. And that was the explanation. Day 2. Afternoon. I've been running numbers in my head all morning. It's what I do when I'm overwhelmed. I go to math, to measurable things. because measurable things behave according to rules. 7 people. 3 weeks of generator fuel at current rationing. Food stores. I've done a real inventory count, more precise than Pop's list. If we portion carefully, 2 meals a day, modest servings, we have approximately 22 days for 7 people. Water. The well shaft gives us about 8 gallons per hour of pumping, which is more than enough for drinking and basic sanitation. The ventilation system is mechanical and doesn't require the generator. It runs on the battery bank, and the bank recharges when the generator is on, so air quality shouldn't be a critical problem. The critical problems, as best I can assess them today, are 1. Generator fuel. 3 weeks is not long enough, and fuel is finite. 2. Food, same issue, 22 days. 3. Medical. Tommy is not well, and nobody is talking about why. 4. Communication. We don't know what's happening out there. The radio is functioning. I tested it this morning, but Pop's antenna is the wire he ran to the root cellar ceiling decades ago, which is not ideal. I need to think about how to improve it. 5. The tire tracks. I'm going to deal with them in roughly that order, because that's how you deal with a failing structural system. You address the most immediate load-bearing failure first, and work down the list. The generator fuel is the anchor problem, because everything else depends on it. The ventilation runs on the battery bank, but the bank requires the generator to recharge. The water pump is hand-operated, so that's independent, but the lighting, the radio, everything else requires power. Pop and I spent an hour looking at the generator together. It's a 12-kilowatt diesel unit, older model but maintained. He's been running it monthly to keep the seals good, he said, the way you're supposed to with stored equipment. The fuel burn rate at half load is about 1 gallon per hour. At our current usage schedule, 12 hours per day, we're burning 12 gallons a day from a total store of approximately 220 gallons, including what was already in the tank. That's 18 days, not 3 weeks. I told Pop this. He didn't look surprised. He said, "What do we need to make it work? Reduce runtime to 8 hours. Push the non-critical loads. Charge the battery bank during a 4-hour window. Run the radio during the same window. Cut everything else." I thought about it, and at some point, we're going to need more fuel. "Yes," he said, "we are. We didn't talk about what that means. Not yet." Day 2, late afternoon. Tommy is worse. He's feverish now, sweating through his shirt, asking for water every 20 minutes. Ray is sitting beside him and trying not to show that he's scared, which means he's being extremely calm in the particular way that scared people are extremely calm. I noticed the shirt earlier, the long sleeves. Everyone else is down here in varying degrees of layered clothing. It's cool in the bunker, maybe 62 degrees, so long sleeves aren't strange. But Tommy came in from Richmond on what was a warm September morning, and he's still wearing them. And he's been wearing them since he arrived, and hasn't taken them off even to sleep. I'm not saying anything yet, I'm noting it. Beverly made soup for dinner using 2 cans of tomato from the shelf and some dried herbs from a small tin she'd grabbed from Pop's spice rack during the loading rush. It was good, actually. She apologized for it being simple, and Floyd told her to stop apologizing, and there was something almost domestic about that exchange that made Irene laugh for the first time since we got here. I ate my soup and listened to the sounds from above. During the day it had been intermittent. Movement across the farmyard, occasional distant sounds I couldn't identify, once something that might have been a voice but might have been something else. By evening it was more of them, I think. More feet. The concrete above us is thick, and what penetrates it is changed by that thickness, stripped of frequency. So what comes through is mostly low register, slow beats. A dragging sound, periodically. Pop sat at the radio desk after dinner and put on the headphones. After a while he took them off and said, "There's a lot of traffic, military frequencies mostly, some civilian, a man out of Waynesboro, Henry something, he's broadcasting in the clear, says the towns east of here have been overrun. That was 40 minutes ago." Overrun meaning? Meaning most of the population is either dead or turned. He said the word turned without hesitation. like it was a word he'd had ready for 30 years. Donna said, "Eugene, can you tell us what that means? What happens when someone turns?" Pop looked at her for a moment. "You stop being yourself," he said. "You still move. You still respond to sound and movement. You don't think anymore. You just seek." He paused. "I've seen it once before. That's all I know. But they're not contagious just by being near them," Donna said. "It's only if they—" "I don't know," Pop said. "In 1987 it was bite transmission, but that was a contained event with a single-source pathogen. This is different. Bigger." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know enough about what this one is." That sentence, that single sentence, is what scared me more than anything else that day. Because Pop is a man who has known enough about everything his entire life. Watching him say, "I don't know," was like watching a load-bearing wall develop a crack. I went to bed. Floor, blanket, work jacket folded under my head, and lay there listening to the sounds from above and thinking about Tommy's long sleeves and the tire tracks in the mud. Day 3. Early morning. I was up before anyone. 4:30 maybe. I sat at the workbench in the dark for a while, then turned on one of the battery lanterns on its dimmest setting and went through the rest of Pop's filing cabinet. There are 5 folders in the bottom drawer. 3 of them are what you'd expect: property documents, equipment manuals for the generator and the water pump, a hand-drawn schematic of the ventilation system. The 4th is full of newspaper clippings from the late 80s and 90s, local Virginia papers, stories about farm subsidies and county commission meetings, and one article from 1988 about a gas leak incident in a rural area of Augusta County that led to the hospitalization of 37 people. The incident is described as quickly contained. No deaths reported. 2 officials quoted, neither of whom has a title I recognize. I know it's not a gas leak. I think Pop kept that article because it's the only public record of what he knows happened there. The 5th folder I almost didn't open. It was sealed with a rubber band, and on the front in Pop's handwriting it said, "Do not open unless I am dead or cannot." I sat with that for a while. I put it back. Not yet. Pop came downstairs at 5:30. He looked at the open filing cabinet and at me, and didn't comment on it. He got the camp stove going for coffee. We sat together at the workbench with our mugs while the bunker was still quiet around us, and he said, without preamble, "When I was 36 years old, about your age, I signed a government document that said I would never discuss what I'd seen that summer. In exchange for my silence, they paid off a significant portion of what I owed on this land." I said, "Okay." I've spent the years since wondering if that was a coward's choice. "Pop, I built this bunker because the choice didn't sit right. If it ever happened again, I wanted to be ready. That felt like the only partial amends I knew how to make." He drank his coffee. "I also built it because your grandmother was the kind of person who made you want to be useful even when you'd done something you weren't proud of." I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not good at the kinds of conversations that require a response to something like that. I said, "What about my dad? Did he know?" "No." "Why not?" A pause. "A long one." Pop set down his mug. "Because I was ashamed," he said. "Not of building the bunker, of the reason for it." He was quiet. "Your father would have asked the right questions and I didn't want to answer them." I thought about that. I thought about my father asking the right questions, and the wall going up between them and us moving to Asheville when I was 9. I thought about how an inheritance of silence gets passed down the same way actual inheritances do. You receive it, whether you want to or not. I said, "I'm glad you built it." Pop looked at me like I'd said something he'd been waiting a long time to hear, and then looked away, and that was that. Day 3, mid-morning. Tommy died at 8:47 this morning. He didn't turn. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He died, fever, respiratory distress. It happened fast once it started. He was conscious until about 10 minutes before the end, and he asked for his dad, and Ray held his hand. And then he was gone. And then we waited, everyone in the bunker hovering at the edge of that terrible question, and he just stayed gone. His left forearm, when Ray pulled up the sleeve for the first time to check his pulse, had a bite wound on it. Already infected, already going bad. The skin around it was the color of a bruise 3 days old. He'd been hiding it since they arrived. So, 3 things to note about Tommy's death and what comes after it. First, he was bitten and he got sick and he died. That's clear. Second, he didn't turn. I don't know what to make of that. Maybe it takes longer than people think. Maybe the infection does something different in some people. Maybe, and this is what I'm trying not to think too hard about yet, maybe some people are immune to the turning part. Maybe the bite kills some people outright and turns others, and we don't know why. Third, what do we do with the body? We can't take it out, not yet. Pop and I discussed this quietly while the others were dealing with their grief. The bathroom space has about 12 square feet of floor. We could seal Tommy in there temporarily, but that compromises our sanitation access. Pop said there's a storage room I hadn't found yet, behind a panel in the left wall. He pulled it open. Another one of those hidden in plain sight things. A section of concrete wall that's actually a lightweight panel fitted into a frame. And behind it was a space about 8 feet deep and 4 feet wide, originally intended for fuel storage, currently empty. We carried Tommy in there at 10 in the morning, wrapped in 2 of the wool blankets. We laid him down in the dark, and Pop said something quiet that I didn't hear, and Ray didn't say anything at all, just stood there with his fists at his sides. Donna sat in the corner for a while after and stared at the floor. Floyd made tea. I went to the radio. Day 3. Afternoon. Radio contact. 2 separate sources. The first is Henry, the guy from Waynesboro that Pop mentioned. His real name is Henry Braddock, 41 years old, former park ranger, broadcasting from his home off Route 254. He's alone. He's been broadcasting every 6 hours since day 1. He sounds fine, actually. Steady. He's got supplies, water, a generator, a dog. He's been tracking what he can pick up on the shortwave and building a picture of what's happening regionally. His picture, as of this morning, Waynesboro is mostly gone. Staunton is worse. Harrisonburg is not responding to anything. The Interstate 81 corridor is jammed solid. Abandoned vehicles from at least Raffine north, and from what he can pick up from the state police emergency frequencies, there's nothing moving that wasn't foot traffic. He mentioned a military checkpoint near Verona, active as of yesterday morning. He said the frequency went quiet around midnight and hasn't come back. I wrote that down. Military checkpoint near Verona. Went quiet overnight. The second contact is a woman named Cora, who's with a group of 11 survivors in a church about 6 miles southeast of us. Small Baptist church, stone construction, off a secondary road. Her group includes 3 children, 1 man with a broken arm, 1 elderly woman who she says is declining. She's been trying to reach anyone with resources, and she found us. Our antenna is weak, but apparently receivable if you're close enough. I told Cora we'd be in contact again at 6 tonight. Then I sat with what I'd learned and thought about what it means. 7 miles southeast, 11 more people, 3 children among them, a man with a broken arm who's a liability and a resource drain simultaneously, an elderly woman who, based on how Cora described her, may not have much time regardless of what else is happening. Pop came over while I was thinking. I told him about the church group. He said, "We can't fit 11 more people." I know. But we can't leave 11 people in a stone church. I know. He sat down. We both looked at the wall for a while. The food doesn't extend, he said. Not without a resupply. I know, I said again. So that's the first problem. He straightened up. Tell me about the supplies in the church. What does Cora's group have? I hadn't asked her that. I made a note to ask her at 6. Day 4. I can't sleep in 4-hour chunks anymore. I sleep for maybe 90 minutes, and then I'm awake and listening to the sounds from above, and my brain starts running through load calculations. I want to talk about the sounds from above, because they've become a kind of clock, a terrible calendar. By day 1, it was intermittent, occasional footfalls, nothing sustained. By day 2, the frequency was higher, especially at night. By day 3, it had started to develop a rhythm, which is not the right word exactly, But what I mean is, they're not random. The infected that have gathered around Pop's farm are not wandering. They seem to be drawn to the same area repeatedly, the northwest corner of the farmhouse. Specifically, I can tell this because the transmission changes above my head, depending on where I'm lying. When they're at the barn end, the sound through the concrete is different from when they're at the house end. Why the northwest corner? I thought about it for 2 days, and then I figured it out. The generator exhaust. The ventilation system exhausts through a pipe that exits the ground at the base of the northwest corner of the house foundation. When the generator is running, there's exhaust coming out of that pipe. They're going to the sound and the heat signature of it. I told Pop. He thought about it. He said, "Can you reroute the exhaust?" "Not without going outside." I thought about the schematic. Maybe. There's a flexible section in the elbow joint before the riser. If I can redirect it down, deeper into the soil, it'll disperse. Is the risk worth it? If we don't, they'll be on that corner every time the generator runs. And if we ever need to use the root cellar to move in and out, that corner is the problem. He nodded. Wait until we know the pattern better. See if there's a time of day when they move off. That's the plan. Cora radioed again at 6 as agreed. I asked about her group's supplies. She had 4 cases of bottled water, 7 cans of food, some dry pasta, about $12 worth of granola bars, and a set of prescription medications belonging to the elderly woman that are not negotiable in terms of taking away, and a pickup truck in the church parking lot, 3/4 of a tank of gas. 11 people, 4 days of food at generous rationing. She sounded calm about this. She said it in a way that suggested she'd already done the math and had moved past the panicking stage into the what do we do stage, which I respected. I told her about the bunker in general terms, that we had a secure location, that it had power and water and supplies, that it was not designed for 11 extra people, but that we were working on what could be done. She said, "We have a nurse, Kathleen. She's been treating Robert's arm, the broken one, and she's been the reason the children aren't falling apart." "A nurse is a real resource," I said. "Yes," Cora said. "That's why I mentioned her." I liked Cora. I told Pop about the nurse. He filed it under useful. Day 4, afternoon. Something happened today that I can't fully explain and that I want to put on record while it's still clear in my mind. Floyd needed air. He's not claustrophobic exactly, but he spent 60 years outdoors, and by day 4, the bunker ceiling was doing something to him that I could see in his shoulders, the way they'd gotten up around his ears without him noticing. I told him he could come up with me for 4 minutes while I checked the northwest corner exhaust situation. We went up together, through the root cellar, out the wooden door, crouching in the gap. The farmyard was quiet. Nothing visible in the immediate area. The 3 that had been at the fence line on day 2 were gone from there. I could see the fence from where I crouched, and it was clear. Floyd said quietly, "There," and pointed. At the far tree line. A 1/4 mile out, maybe more. The tree line that separates Pop's north pasture from the state forest land. There were maybe 30 of them standing at the edge of the trees. Just standing there. Not moving. Facing. Not toward us. Facing inward. Toward the trees, backs to the open field. We watched for a full minute, and none of them moved at all. They just stood there with their backs to us, at the edge of the forest, like they were looking at something in the trees that we couldn't see. Then, and I would swear to this on anything, they all turned at once. Not one by one, together, facing the same direction, due south. And then they started walking south, in a loose group, but moving together, in the same direction, at roughly the same pace. We went back inside. I'm not going to speculate about what that was. I'm going to write it down and move on, because the alternative is to sit here and think about what it means that 30 infected people were standing at the edge of a tree line facing the wrong way, and then turned and walked south together, and that will not help me fix the generator exhaust problem. Floyd hasn't mentioned it since we came back down, but he's been talking more. His shoulders are down from around his ears, and he's been talking, mostly to Beverly, sometimes to Irene, and the talking sounds forced in the specific way that someone talks when they're trying to drown out what they're thinking. I understand that completely. Day 5. Morning. Irene found the toolkit. I'd been looking for a specific crescent wrench to get at the exhaust pipe fitting, and hadn't found it in the main kit Pop had stocked. Irene, who had apparently been going systematically through every storage space in the bunker the way teenagers sometimes attack problems when they don't know what else to do with their energy, came to me at breakfast and said there was a second tool bag behind the generator. She was right. Behind the generator, hanging on a hook screwed into the concrete wall, was a canvas tool roll with about 30 tools in it, including the crescent wrench I needed and a pipe threading set and 2 types of pliers I was going to want when I looked at the water pump. Good find, I said. The water pump is also making a sound it probably shouldn't be making, she said. I looked at her. What kind of sound? Like a whistle, like the intake seal might be going. She said this the way she'd say anything, evenly, without emphasis. How do you know what an intake seal sounds like when it's going? My dad has a well pump. He's fixed it like 4 times. I've helped, she shrugged. I know sounds. I made a mental note. Irene is an actual asset, not a liability to manage, an asset. I checked the pump. She was right. The intake seal was wearing, not failing yet, but the whistle meant it was on the way. I found a replacement seal in the pump's maintenance kit, which was stored with the manual in Pop's document folder. It took 40 minutes to swap it out, and Irene held the flashlight and passed tools in the right order without being asked. When it was done, she said, "Are we going to go get those other people, the ones in the church?" I said, "We're working on how." "It would be easier if the truck were closer," she said. "The truck's parked at the barn. If we needed to load people fast, it should be closer." I looked at her again. "It's just logical," she said. She was right. The truck was at the barn, 70 meters from the root cellar entrance. If we were going to extract a group of survivors from 6 miles away, we needed the truck positioned better. But moving the truck meant going outside, which meant exposure, which meant risk. I went to talk to Floyd. Day 5. Afternoon. Floyd, Ray, and I talked for an hour about logistics. This is the kind of conversation I'm good at. Resources, constraints, sequence, risk. I laid it out like a project plan. Problem: 11 people in a church 6 miles out, running out of food in roughly 72 hours. Assets: 1 truck, 1 generator producing 12-hour power windows, a shortwave radio, the bunker as a secure location, 4 people who can work and make decisions, 2 more who can assist, 1 teenager who's sharper than most adults, and whatever Cora's group brings when they arrive. Constraints: food for 7 people currently, 0 food flexibility for expansion without resupply, limited fuel, infected density unknown outside immediate area, unknown state of the road between us and the church. Required actions in sequence: 1. Reposition the truck to the root cellar. 2. Assess the road conditions and infected presence on the 6-mile route to the church. 3. Resupply food before or simultaneously with the church extraction. 4. Integrate 11 people into the bunker without triggering a supply crisis. The most dangerous part of all of this is that we don't know the road. Ray said he knows the road. He's driven it hundreds of times, and he made the argument that with the windows up and moving fast, the risk was manageable. Floyd said, "Moving fast on a road you can't see beyond the headlights is how you drive into a car that's stopped sideways across the lanes." Neither of them is wrong. "We go in daylight," I said. "Slow. Scout first, then the church. And we bring fuel from the barn. There are 2 more cans in there that we didn't bring down." They both agreed. I radioed Cora, told her we were coming in approximately 48 hours, told her to keep everyone quiet and not to move from the church until they heard from me. She said, "There's something I should tell you." I said, "Okay." "There's a man who found us yesterday. He's not from here. He came on foot from the direction of Staunton, and he's not entirely coherent. He says there's a military unit operating out of an old National Guard armory near Verona. He says they're collecting survivors." I thought about Henry Braddock's mention of the Verona checkpoint going quiet. "Collecting them for what?" I said. A pause on Cora's end. "He didn't say. He wasn't entirely coherent, like I said. She paused again. Garrett. He has burns on his arms. Like chemical burns. I've never seen burns that look like that. I said, where is he now? Asleep. He ate a granola bar and fell asleep. Keep him there. Don't let him leave before I can talk to him. Okay, she said. His name is Dennis Pryor. He says he was a school bus driver. Day 5. Evening. Nobody's talking much tonight. Pop has been at the radio desk for 3 hours, just listening, not transmitting. He's filling the notebook with notes in his small, cramped handwriting. Ray is sitting with Donna. Beverly is braiding Irene's hair, which Irene is tolerating with the specific patience of someone who knows it's doing the braiding person more good than the receiving person. I've been thinking about what Dennis Pryor, the school bus driver from Staunton with chemical burns on his arms, said about the military collecting survivors, and about the checkpoint near Verona that went quiet overnight, and trying to build a picture from those pieces. Here's what I can build. Military sets up a collection point, active as of day 2. By overnight day 3, silent. Either they were overrun, possible, given how fast things seem to be moving, or they went silent intentionally. There's a difference between a frequency going quiet because everyone's dead, and a frequency going quiet because someone turned the transmitter off. Henry Braddock said it went quiet at midnight, the middle of the night. That's not when an overrun happens. Overruns happen during peaks of activity, when the infected are drawn to noise and movement. Midnight is quiet. They went silent on purpose. Why do you go silent on purpose? Because you don't want to be found, or because you don't want what you're doing to be heard. Pop came to stand beside me. He looked at what I was writing in my notebook. He said, I need to show you something. He went to the filing cabinet and took out the sealed folder, the one that said, do not open unless I am dead or cannot. He brought it to the workbench and set it down. He pulled the rubber band off. I was going to wait until it was necessary, he said, but I think necessary might be closer than I thought. Inside the folder, 3 documents. The first is a handwritten account, Pop's handwriting, 15 dense pages, of the 1987 project. The second is a photostat copy of a page from what looks like a government technical document, something about containment optimization procedures and pathogen vector analysis, heavily technical, mostly impenetrable to me, but Pop has underlined specific sentences in red ink. The third is a single sheet of paper with handwritten coordinates and what appears to be a frequency and a call sign. I looked at the third sheet for a long time. I said, what is this? In 1987, Pop said, there was a man on the containment project named Gerald Oates. Officially, he was a CDC liaison. Unofficially, I think he was something else. But he was a decent man, one of the only ones on that project who was uncomfortable with how things were being handled. He paused. Before I left, he gave me those coordinates. He said, and I'm giving you the exact words because I wrote them down later. He said, if this happens on a scale we can't contain, these are the coordinates of the place the people who matter have agreed matters. That's what he said. He gave you coordinates for a safe zone, I said. For something. Pop sat down. I've had 37 years to decide what those coordinates mean, and I've never managed to figure it out from the outside. It could be a real safe location. It could be a trap. It could be a place Oates made up to make himself feel better about walking away from something bad. He was quiet. I've been afraid to use that frequency, because if we transmit on it, anyone listening knows where we are. I picked up the sheet and looked at the coordinates. The location, if I've got the rough geography right, is somewhere in the Allegheny Mountains to our west. 40 miles, maybe more. Why are you showing me now? I said. Pop looked at me steadily. Because I'm 63 years older than this situation, and I can feel my body making decisions my brain isn't fully consulted about, he said. I need someone else to know. I looked at him. He looked back. There's something in his face I've been seeing more of since we came down here. A kind of tiredness that isn't just sleep deprivation. He's been down the stairs to the bathroom twice this morning, and both times, he came back moving slower than he went down. What's going on with you? I said. Old age, he said. Heart. He said it the way you say something you've been sitting on for a while and have decided is time to put on the table. There's medication in the medical kit. The beta blockers, those are mine. Pop. I'm managing it. I've been managing it for 5 years. He put a hand flat on the workbench in a way that looked like steadying himself. I'm not dying this week, Garrett, but you should know. I sat with that. I said, does anyone else know? Your father knew. A pause. It's another thing we didn't discuss in the time we had. The time we had, my father died on a Tuesday in March. Sudden, heart attack, no warning. And I drove to the hospital and got there 20 minutes after. Pop called me that evening and said, I'm sorry about your father. And we talked for 4 minutes. That was the extent of that. I'm sorry I wasn't here more, I said. And I don't know if I meant in general or in the years since my dad died. Both, maybe. Probably both. Pop said, you're here now. Day 6. Morning. We moved the truck at first light. Floyd drove and I walked alongside. Ray stood at the root cellar door with the 12 gauge. There were 2 infected in the farmyard when we came out, both of them at the northwest corner as expected, drawn to the exhaust pipe, and they turned toward us when the truck engine started. They moved slowly. That's the thing I keep noting. They're not fast. The ones I've seen move at a walking pace, slow walking, the kind of walk you do when you're not sure where you're going. One of them was a woman, middle-aged, in what had been a yellow cardigan. The other was an older man in work clothes. Both of them had wounds. Her face was wrong on the left side, old blood dried black, and his hands were torn up badly. Both of them came toward the sound of the engine. Floyd reversed the truck to the root cellar while I want to be clinical about this so I don't think too hard about what I was actually doing. While I kept myself between the truck and the 2 infected, and made enough noise moving south across the yard that they tracked me instead of the truck. Then I ran. I ran faster than I have since high school, got inside the root cellar and pulled the wooden door shut behind me and stood in the dark with my hands on my knees, listening to my heartbeat. 2 minutes later, I was back in the bunker. Floyd drove the truck to the root cellar without incident. The truck is now 40 feet from our door. Ray said, good. I thought, it is good. Now we have to fill it with people. Day 6, afternoon. The radio has been busier today. I've been on it for a long time. Henry Braddock confirmed what I suspected about the military. He said he'd picked up a transmission, civilian frequency, someone who sounded terrified, from a man who said he'd been at the Verona checkpoint and escaped. This man said the military wasn't running a rescue operation, or it wasn't only a rescue operation. He said they were separating survivors into 2 groups, and that people in one of the groups weren't coming back out. Henry said he didn't know if the man was credible. He said the man sounded like he might have been on something, or in shock, or both. I radioed Cora and told her about this, without details, and told her the pickup plan was still on for tomorrow morning. She said Dennis Pryor was awake and wanted to talk to me directly. I said put him on. Dennis Pryor has a voice like he's been recently punched in the throat, hoarse, careful with his words. He said he was driving a school bus on day 1, trying to get a group of kids home, and got stopped at the Verona checkpoint on day 2 after walking out of Staunton. He said the checkpoint had soldiers and civilians and was organized and he thought he was safe. Then he said, they took the blood samples, everyone, and 2 people, a teenage boy and a woman. Their tests came back with something the soldiers were flagging. I don't know what exactly. I don't know medicine. And they took those 2 people to a separate area. And I was near enough to hear. I heard it. Heard what? I said. A long pause. I left after that, he said. Over the fence at the back. I had to go through the field, and there were things in the field, and I fell, and that's how I got the burns. There's something on the ground in some of the fields. A chemical. I don't know what it is. It smells wrong. He paused. Don't go to that checkpoint. I said I wasn't planning to. He said, good. Don't let anyone convince you it's safe. I clicked off and sat for a moment. Then I wrote it all down. A pathogen, blood testing, separating people based on some test result. A different response for the positives. and a chemical on the ground in the fields. I went and got Pop. He listened to everything. When I finished, he sat for a moment and then opened the notebook and found a specific page and held it out. The red underlined sentence in the government document read, "Asymptomatic carriers may exhibit no behavioral markers for up to 12 days post-exposure and should be considered vectors for secondary transmission." Asymptomatic carriers. People who are exposed, who don't turn immediately, who look and act fine, who might not even know they've been infected. Tommy who died on day 3 without turning. Or people who carry the pathogen without developing either outcome, who are infected but immune to the worst of it, who would test positive and be separated out. I said, "Pop, in 1987, was there anything like this? Testing? Asymptomatic carriers?" "Yes," he said. Oates mentioned it. It was one of the things that made the containment difficult. People who were exposed but not symptomatic were spreading it before anyone knew they were infected. He was quiet. In 1987, they dealt with that by removing those individuals from the containment zone. Removing them, he said again, with a specific flatness. The room was very quiet. "How many people are we talking about?" I said. "In 1987. 11, he said, "that I know of." I put the notebook down. I thought about the teenage boy and the woman at the checkpoint. I thought about what Dennis heard that made him climb a fence into a field and get chemical burns rather than stay on the government side of that fence. "Pop," I said, "the safe zone coordinates." "Yes. If it's real, it's 40 miles west. Through whatever's on the roads. With 11 people from the church and 7 of us, that's 18 people in one truck." I did the math. We'd need to make 2 trips, minimum. Or find another vehicle. I agreed. We looked at each other. "When you think it's time," Pop said, "you tell me and I'll tell you what I know." Day 7. The church run took 6 hours, and I'm still not entirely sure how we all got back. Floyd drove. I was in the passenger seat with one of the hunting rifles on my lap that I very much hoped I would not have to use, and Pop's window breaker tool on my wrist. Ray was in the truck bed. The road was not as clear as I'd hoped. The first 2 miles were manageable. We knew these roads, familiar damage, a fence line down across the shoulder, the kind of thing that happens in a bad storm, nothing major. A few abandoned vehicles at the intersection of 2 county roads, but pushed far enough to the shoulders that Floyd could thread between them. Then the 3rd mile. I want to describe this carefully because I think it matters. The 3rd mile is where we hit what I can only describe as a scatter. Not a horde, that's not the right word for it. A scatter. Individual infected, distributed across about a 1/4 mile of road and fields on both sides of it, not moving together, not heading anywhere in particular, just present. 15, 20, maybe more in the field to our left. A few on the road itself. Floyd slowed. "Go through or go around?" he said. The road curved to the right 300 yards ahead, which meant we couldn't see what was beyond the curve. Going around meant a field track that might or might not hold the truck's weight in September soil. "The ones on the road," I said. "Are they in the middle or the shoulder?" "Shoulder left, 2 of them." "Go through at speed." Floyd went through at speed. The 2 on the left shoulder turned toward the truck noise, but Floyd was past them before they were fully oriented. The ones in the field to our left started moving toward the sound of the engine, but we were already beyond them. Around the curve, clear road, for another mile. Then we came over a rise and saw the barn. It's a red barn, set back from the road by about 100 feet. Old construction, probably Depression era, the kind of barn that has outlasted 3 generations of the same family. All the doors were closed. All the windows, the small square ventilation windows near the peak, were sealed from the inside with what looked like boards or fabric. And on the main door, visible from the road, a piece of white-painted plywood with text on it. Floyd slowed without being asked. I rolled down the window and read it. "We tried. There are 6 of us inside. We tried." Floyd sat with both hands on the wheel. We didn't stop. We drove on and neither of us mentioned the barn again that day. Ray, in the bed, may have seen it or may not have. I didn't ask him, and he didn't say. The church was right where Cora said it would be. Stone construction, Baptist, white steeple, not large. The truck in the lot was a green Chevy half-ton, older than ours, and there were people inside the church because I could see shapes at the small windows. I knocked on the main door. 3 slow knocks, then 2, which is what I'd told Cora over the radio. The door opened. Cora is 51. She's wearing the clothes she was wearing when she drove her youngest grandchild to school on day 1. Dark pants, a gray V-neck, running shoes that are past running condition. She has the kind of competent stillness that I associate with people who have been responsible for others for so long that calm has become structural in them, built into how they carry themselves. She said, "Garrett?" I said, "Yes. Let's do this fast." 11 people came out of that church in 4 minutes flat. Cora had them organized, bags and supplies already assembled by the door. The nurse, Kathleen, late 40s, short gray hair, carrying a bag that I later found out was entirely medical supplies she'd gathered from the church's first aid cabinet and the purses of the women in the group, took point on moving the kids, 3 of them between ages maybe 6 and 12, to the truck. The man with the broken arm, Robert, 50s, stoic about it, climbed in the bed without complaining. Dennis Pryor moved slowly, still clearly in pain, and 2 of the other survivors helped him up. I counted heads at the truck, 12, including Cora and Dennis, and excluding our 3. Too many for one truck. I said, "Cora, the Chevy. Can it run?" "It ran 2 days ago." "Keys?" She held them up. Floyd took the Chevy. The rest of us distributed between the 2 trucks. Kathleen and the children in the cab of our truck. Robert and Dennis and 3 others in the bed. 2 of Cora's group drove with Floyd in the Chevy. We left the church at 11:40 in the morning. We were back at Pop's farm by 2:20. In between those times, several things happened that I'll get to. But the first thing that happened is more important. On the way back, on the county road, maybe half a mile from Pop's farm, I saw the child. She was standing in the middle of the road, maybe 8 or 9 years old, in a yellow dress with white smocking at the chest, standing perfectly still in the center of the road, facing us as we came around a curve and nearly didn't stop in time. Floyd braked. Our truck braked behind him. I got out. The girl she was uninjured. No visible wounds. Her feet were bare and dirty from the road. Her dress was dirty at the hem, but her face was clean, and her eyes were tracking me normally, focused, reactive. She was blinking. She was breathing. She looked at me. I said, "Hey, are you okay? Where are your parents?" She looked at me for a long time. She said nothing. I crouched down to her level. "Can you understand me? Are you hurt?" Still nothing. Not a scared silence. She didn't look scared. She looked like someone thinking about something very carefully. Her eyes were clear and present. Cora got out of the truck behind me, went to one knee, said softly, "Sweetheart, we're going to a safe place. Do you want to come with us?" The girl looked at Cora. Then she looked back at me. Then she looked past us both, over our heads, at something behind us. And she turned around and walked off the road into the ditch, and through the ditch into the field beyond, and she didn't look back. We stood there for a moment. "She was okay?" Cora said. "I think so," I said. We got back in the trucks. I haven't been able to stop seeing the look on her face. Not scared, not lost. The way she looked past us at whatever was behind us. The way she left. Day 7, evening. We got 19 people into the bunker. That's an absurd number for a space this size. We're stacked in, cots repurposed as platform seating during the day, blankets on the floor, 2 people per cot for sleeping. The bathroom situation is, I'm not going to describe it at length. I will say the composting system was not designed for 19 people, and we're managing. The food situation I calculated immediately. What we had, plus what Cora's group brought, gives us approximately 9 days at survival level rationing. 1 real meal and 1 light meal per day per person. 9 days. That's the number I'm living with now. 9 days. Kathleen assessed Robert's arm and said it had been set adequately, which surprised us both. Floyd admitted he'd set it himself, based on a YouTube video he'd watched years ago about wilderness first aid, and Kathleen said, "You watched a YouTube video and set an arm this clean?" And Floyd said he'd had a lot of years of dealing with injuries before YouTube was a thing. And Kathleen laughed, which was the first real laugh I'd heard from anyone in days. Dennis Pryor. I spent an hour with him in a corner of the bunker, keeping our voices low. The chemical burns on his arms are real. Kathleen confirmed it. Said it looks like something caustic, potentially lime-based or industrial-strength pH. The skin is raw, partially blistered. She's been treating it with what she has. He told me everything he saw at the Verona checkpoint. The blood tests. The separation. What he heard afterward. He said, "There were 2 military guys who they didn't look right about it. They weren't participating. Just standing back, not making eye contact. That's how I knew it wasn't going to get better." Did you get any sense of their operation? How many soldiers? What kind of vehicles? 2 Humvees and a big transport truck. Maybe 14 soldiers total. They had tents set up, generators. It was organized. He paused. The man running it. I didn't catch a rank insignia, wasn't close enough. Was giving orders like he'd given them before. Like he'd done this before. I thought about the government document in Pop's folder. The 1987 project. The 11 people removed from the containment zone. He probably had, I said. Dennis looked at me. There was an earlier version of this, I said. 1987, rural Virginia. I don't know the details. My grandfather was there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So they've been sitting on this, all this time. Seems like it. And now they're running the same." "I don't know," I said. "I don't know that. I know what you saw. I know what my grandfather saw in 1987. I'm not going to tell you those 2 things mean the military is running systematic executions, because I don't have enough information, and I'd rather not make that conclusion until I do." He nodded slowly. "But you're not going to the checkpoint." "I'm not going to the checkpoint," I said. Day 8, full day below. 2 things of note today. The first is that I got the exhaust rerouted. I spent 90 minutes on it with a length of flexible pipe from the generator maintenance kit and 3 fittings I had to jury-rig, using clamps and some threaded rod I cut down. The exhaust now discharges into the soil below the concrete pad, rather than through the riser pipe. This means the heat signature and the smell should disperse downward rather than surfacing. It's not a perfect solution. Some of it will still migrate, but it's significantly better than before. When I crawled out from behind the generator, Irene was there to take my tools, which I hadn't asked her to do. "Better?" she said. "Better," I said. The second thing is that Cora and I and Pop had what amounted to a strategy session at the workbench, which kept getting interrupted by the logistics of 19 people in a confined space, but which eventually covered the ground it needed to cover. I laid it out, 9 days of food. The Chevy and the truck as vehicles. An unknown number of infected in the surrounding area, with an unknown, and I want to stress, very unknown, pattern of movement. A military checkpoint of unclear intent that I consider hostile until I know otherwise. A safe zone coordinate from 37 years ago that may or may not still exist. Cora listened to all of this without interrupting. Then she said, "What would a supply run look like?" "There's a hardware and farm supply store about 4 miles east," Pop said. "Ted Harrington's place. He closed the store when his wife got sick 3 years ago, so it's been locked and unoccupied. Canned goods in the back. Seeds. Tool stock. Not a full grocery, but better than nothing." "And?" Cora said, because she could clearly hear the hesitation. "And there's a Grange Hall 6 miles north that the County Farmers Co-op uses as a distribution point. They store dry goods for the food bank program through the winter. Last I knew there was a significant stock of canned goods and 50-pound bags of dried staples." He paused. "But 6 miles north is closer to the town of Creswick, and I don't know what's in Creswick." "We need both locations," I said. Or at least the Grange Hall. Cora said, "How many people can you spare for a run?" I thought about it. 3. Floyd is the best driver, and he knows these roads. I go because I'm the one making structural and logistical calls. Third person for lifting and as backup. Kathleen could go, Cora said. She's tougher than she looks, and she knows what medical supplies to grab if she sees any. I looked at her. Kathleen was across the room doing something with Robert's arm. She caught my look, because she's attentive, and raised an eyebrow. "We'll talk to her," I said. "The supply run is planned for day 10. I want a day of rest and preparation between now and then. I want to know the current infected pattern better before we commit. Also, genuinely, I'm tired. My legs ache from sleeping on concrete. My eyes hurt from the fluorescent light. I'd kill for a shower." Day 9. Something woke me at 3 in the morning, and it took me 30 seconds to place what it was: silence. For 8 days, there's been ambient sound from above. Not always loud, not always identifiable, but continuous. The low-register transmission of movement and occasional impact through 4 feet of concrete. The acoustic baseline of the world above us. At 3 in the morning on day 9, there was nothing. Complete silence from above. I lay there for about 10 minutes, just listening to the internal sounds of the bunker, the battery fan, Floyd's breathing, somewhere at the back Cora turning over on her blankets, and felt the absence of the outside sounds, like a physical pressure change. Then I got up and went to the radio. Henry Braddock was on. Not broadcasting, receiving mostly. But his transmitter was hot, and I could hear him breathing in the gaps. I said, "Quiet. Henry, you there?" "Yeah," he said. "You hearing it?" "Hearing the absence. What's happening?" "They moved," he said. "About an hour ago. A big group of them. I can see them from my upstairs window, maybe 60, 70 of them, moving south, all going the same direction. It's not random movement, Garrett. They're going somewhere. South, like the group at the tree line on day 4. "Any sound that might draw them south?" I said. "Nothing I can hear." A pause. "Well, there's one thing. There's been a broadcast running since about midnight, on a frequency I can't fully identify. Not military, not civilian exactly. It's a signal, a repeating tone sequence. About 8 tones in a pattern, started at midnight. Is it a distress call? I don't think so. It sounds, I know this sounds weird. It sounds like it's meant for them, like a signal you'd use if you wanted to move animals. I sat with that for a very long time. Someone is moving the infected on purpose. Someone is broadcasting a frequency signal that the infected are responding to. Someone can steer them. I thought about the 1987 project, Oates and his coordinates, a government system built around this pathogen that went back nearly 40 years. A pathogen that someone had, at some point, studied extensively enough to know how to use. I thought about Dennis Pryor at the checkpoint, the blood tests, what he heard. I thought about the child in the road in the yellow dress, how she looked past us at something behind us, how she walked away without a word. I went back to the bunker and lay down on the concrete and stared at the ceiling, and didn't sleep again until morning. Day 10, supply run. Floyd drove. Kathleen rode shotgun. I was in the back seat. We took the truck. Ted Harrington's farm supply store was locked, as Pop said. But a locked store is a 10-second problem with the right tools. And Ted's store had the additional advantage of having a gap between the back door and its frame, where the wood had warped over 3 years of vacancy. Floyd had the door open in under a minute. Inside, dust. The particular smell of a farm store that's been closed a while. Dry feed and fertilizer, and old rubber from hose stock. We moved fast. Back room. Shelves of canned goods. Mostly pet food, which is not ideal but is protein. Some human food. Cans of stew, canned soup, a case of baked beans. Roughly 40 cans of useful human food. We took all of it. Hardware. I grabbed 2 rolls of electrical wire, a box of fittings, 4 batteries still in their packaging, and a hand-crank flashlight that was still in its retail box. Kathleen found a shelf of medical supplies, Antiseptic, bandaging, over-the-counter pain medication in bulk, a blood pressure cuff still in its box. We were in and out in 22 minutes. The Grange Hall was different. The Grange Hall is a 2-story building on a county road, painted white, with a parking lot and a flagpole and the kind of institutional dignity that local organizations maintain, even when they're not worth maintaining. The parking lot had 3 cars in it when we pulled up, all abandoned, one of them with both front doors open like someone had gotten out fast. The front door was unlocked. Floyd stopped me outside. He said, quietly, "Smell that?" I smelled it. Something I don't have a good word for. Not decay, exactly. More like the bottom of a dumpster behind a restaurant in summer. Not overpowering, but present. "Something's been in there," he said. Kathleen said, "Or someone." We went in. The main hall was clear. The smell was stronger inside, but still low grade. The supply room was to the right, padlocked. The padlock was a commercial model, and I spent 3 frustrating minutes on it before Floyd found a fire extinguisher bracket on the wall and just broke the hasp off. The supply room had what Pop said it would: canned goods, large bags of rice and dried beans, pasta, canned tomatoes in bulk, probably 3 weeks of food for 19 people, if we could move it. We could not move it all in one trip. We took as much as the truck could carry. I had to think about suspension rating, and we loaded to about 80% capacity and tagged the rest in our heads for a second trip. On the way to the door, I noticed the upstairs. There was a staircase in the left corner, and the door at the bottom of it was closed, and there was light under the gap. Electric light. A lamp or a flashlight, steady. Floyd and I looked at each other. I went up the stairs. The upstairs of the Grange Hall is a meeting room. Long tables, metal folding chairs, a podium at one end. There were 4 people in it. 2 men, 1 woman, a teenage boy about 15. They were sitting at a table eating something out of cans, and they all stood up very fast when I came through the door. The man nearest me, tall, sunburned, work boots, said, "Who are you?" in a voice that was trying to be threatening and was mostly just scared. I said my name. I said we were taking supplies from the downstairs, and we had a secure location, and we had 19 people in it. He said his name was Pete Garland. He was with his wife Linda and their son Cal, and a neighbor named Harlan, who had a gash on his forehead from day one, that Kathleen, when she came upstairs, said was infected and needed cleaning immediately. Pete looked at Kathleen, the way a drowning person looks at a life ring. We had 23 people to deal with. Day 10, afternoon. The math on the food is now slightly better, because we added what we got from both locations to the stores. Call it 12 days at survival rationing if I'm being generous, which is 4 more days of breathing room. The math on the space and resources is significantly worse. We drove Pete's group back in both trucks, Pete riding with Floyd and talking his ear off, according to Floyd's expression, when they arrived, which was the expression of a man who has been talked at for 30 minutes and has given up on replies. Cal Garland, 15, blonde, spoke in sentence fragments, clearly trying to project confidence. Immediately attached himself to Irene, which was either going to be useful or a problem, and I hadn't decided which. Pete, I want to be honest about Pete. He's not a bad man. He's a man who is used to being in charge of things, who has a loud voice and confident body language, and who has been running a small construction business in this county for 20 years, and has opinions about how things should be done. In normal circumstances, that would make him someone I could work with. In a bunker with 23 people, what it made him was friction. He had opinions about the rationing, about where people should sleep, about whether we should try to make contact with the Verona checkpoint. They're the government, that's what they're there for. And about my grandfather, specifically about the fact that Pop had a bunker nobody knew about and hadn't thought to tell the wider community about it decades ago. Pop listened to that one without responding. I said, "He's been maintaining this bunker for 30 years, and he's the reason you're inside it right now. I'd note that." Pete said, "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying," I said. "Right now I need your actual skills. You run a construction company. What can you do? He looked at me. Something shifted. The bluster went down a notch. What do you need? He said. I need to know if there's a way to extend our exhaust rerouting. I need an evaluation of the structural integrity of this space, specifically the ceiling joints. There's a hairline crack I want assessed, and I need someone to organize the sleeping arrangements so nobody's losing it over space. He thought about it. Then he said, yeah, I can do that. Good. Pete became useful. Day 12, late night. I've been sick for 2 days with something that isn't the infection. It's a flu or a stress response thing. My body deciding that 14-hour days of logistics and problem solving and not sleeping on concrete were a collective insult that needed to be addressed. Fever of 102 for most of yesterday. Kathleen made me drink water and gave me ibuprofen and told me to stop trying to get up, and I ignored that instruction repeatedly, and she stopped telling me. Pop sat with me for a while yesterday evening, just sat there, didn't say anything particularly. Brought me crackers and water, changed the cloth on my forehead when it went warm, the way I imagine he must have done for my grandmother at some point. The quiet domestic competence of a man who learned to care for someone a long time ago and never lost the habit even after the person was gone. I was half asleep when he said, "Your father was very like you." I opened my eyes. "In what way?" I said. "The way you think," he said. "The engineer's way of needing the structure of a thing before you commit." He was an architect. The same instinct, different application. He was looking at the wall. He wanted to understand the framework of everything, including people, including me. What framework were you not giving him? Pop was quiet for a long time. The battery fan hummed. Somewhere in the bunker, someone was sleeping and snoring lightly. I couldn't explain to him why I'd made a choice that benefited us financially while participating in something I knew was morally wrong, he said. The land debt. Signing that government document paid off the land debt. Your grandmother and I kept the farm. When I tried to explain that to him, what came out was defensive, the wrong kind of explanation. He paused. He wanted me to say I was wrong. I couldn't say it without the explanation, and the explanation sounded like excuse. He turned and looked at me. It was wrong. What I agreed to in 1987. I was wrong to sign and wrong to be silent, and the financial reason was insufficient justification. I've known that since about 1992. I didn't say anything. I need you to know that, he said. Before, I need you to know that I know it. I said, I know. He said, okay. He went back to his cot, and I lay there, and the fever made everything slightly unreal. And I thought about my father asking the right questions, and Pop not being able to answer them in the right order, and the 4 years of silence, and then the careful relationship that came after, both of them moving around the space between them, like there was furniture there that couldn't be moved. We learn things at the wrong time, I think, or we learn them at the only time we can. Day 13, back on my feet. Cora ran things while I was sick and ran them well. The rationing, the sleeping assignments, the radio schedule. She handled all of it. When I came back to the workbench, she gave me a 12-minute summary of what had happened in the last 2 days, and then handed me a cup of reconstituted instant coffee, and went back to what she'd been doing, which was exactly the right thing to do. Henry Braddock has been broadcasting less frequently. His last contact was yesterday at 2 p.m. He said his generator fuel was getting low and he was conserving. He said the signal that moved the infected group south had gone quiet on day 11 and hadn't come back. I've been thinking about that signal for 4 days. I said to Pop today, in the 1987 project, was there any component of the pathogen research that involved acoustic or frequency sensitivity? He looked at me carefully. There was a man on the team, he said. Not Oates, someone else. He had a background in behavioral science. He was interested in something about the sensory processing of the infected. I didn't pay close attention to it. It wasn't in my lane. He paused. He used a phrase once that I wrote down because I didn't understand it. Aural vector stimulus. Sound as a steering mechanism. Something in the pathogen affects how the infected respond to specific auditory frequencies. and someone has mapped that response curve well enough to use it. Which means someone has been studying the infected for longer than the 5 days since this outbreak started. Which means someone knew this was coming, or something like it, and had time to develop tools for managing it. Pete, predictably, thought I was being paranoid when I laid this out to the group. He's gotten more settled in the last 2 days, but he still occasionally says things like, "You're overthinking it," and "There's probably a simple explanation." Cora said quietly, "The simple explanation has human beings being herded with a sound frequency, Pete. I don't find that particularly reassuring." Pete didn't respond to that. Floyd said, "So who's doing it?" "I don't know," I said. "The government, maybe. Or someone connected to whatever happened in 1987. They could be trying to clear areas, move the infected away from a specific location." "Or toward one," Irene said. Nobody had thought of that. The room got quiet. "Or toward one," I said. Day 14. The second supply run. Kathleen, Ray, and I. Floyd stayed back because his knee had been swelling, an old injury aggravated by concrete floors, and I needed him rested for whatever came next. We went back to the Grange Hall for the remaining supplies. Uneventful trip. 22 minutes in and out. The upstairs was empty. Pete's group had taken everything they'd had with them when they came to the bunker. On the return trip, I made a decision that Ray disagreed with, but didn't argue against, which is the kind of trust I've come to rely on from him. I turned north instead of south, toward Creswick, toward Verona. Not all the way to Verona. I had a specific destination about 3 miles up the county road, a rise in the terrain, a hill that locals call the Hartley Ridge, because the Hartley family used to run cattle on it, that gives you a line of sight northwest, toward where the National Guard Armory is supposed to be. We drove to the base of the ridge, and I got out and climbed the hill on foot, alone, Ray watching from the truck with the rifle across his lap. The hill is maybe 200 feet above the valley floor, and from the top you can see, on a clear day, for 8 or 10 miles. It was a clear day. I couldn't see the armory from there. Too many tree lines and ridge folds between here and Verona. But what I could see in the northwest was smoke. 2 distinct plumes, widely spaced. The color and behavior of burning that's been going on for a while. Not fresh fire, but sustained burning. The kind of smoke that comes from something significant, being systematically reduced. And to the south, the direction the infected had been moving, a long dark smear along the horizon that might have been smoke, or might have been something else, something dense and low-moving, that I looked at for about 30 seconds before I decided I didn't want to know and came back down the hill. Ray didn't ask what I'd seen. He could tell from my face. On the way home, we passed through a stretch of road flanked on both sides by empty fields, and I noticed the grass on the left side was wrong, yellow-brown in irregular patches, not the natural fall-off pattern you'd see from drought or season change, but something more like kill patterns from chemical exposure. Irregular, overlapping, the kind of pattern you'd see if something had been distributed from above. Dennis Pryor's chemical burns. From a field he'd cut through. Whatever was on that grass, it had been put there. Day 14. Evening. I told Pop what I'd seen. Then I told everyone. Pete said the burn patterns could be herbicide drift. He said it was too easy to assume everything was connected. Dennis Pryor, from the back corner where he'd been sitting quietly, said, "The burns on my arms aren't from herbicide." Nobody said anything. I said, "I think we need to make a decision about the coordinates." The room shifted. Pop had told Cora about the coordinates 2 days ago, by my request, because she needed the full picture. Now everyone in the room knew at least the basic outline, that Pop had a set of coordinates from 1987 that supposedly pointed to a secure location, and that transmitting on the associated frequency would reveal our position. Pete said, "If there's a safe zone, we should go to it." "We don't know what it is," Cora said. "It's better than sitting here counting canned beans." "Is it?" Cora said, with a flatness that shut him down temporarily. I said, "We have 12 days of food, possibly less. At some point, we're going to have to move regardless of whether we have a destination. So the question isn't whether we eventually leave, It's where we're going, and when. I looked around the room. The options as I see them, we try for the coordinates, which may or may not be real. We try to move generally west, into the mountains, and look for unoccupied high-ground shelter. Or we keep doing supply runs, and try to outlast the immediate phase of the outbreak here. Floyd said, "How long does an outbreak like this typically last?" Everyone looked at Pop. He said, "In 1987, the active phase was contained within about 3 weeks. But 1987 was a small event. 37 people exposed, maybe fewer turned. This," he paused, "this is not 1987. So we can't wait it out," Ray said. "I don't think we can." Silence. The generator hummed. In the far corner, one of the younger children, Cora's granddaughter, was asleep with her head in Cora's lap, and Cora had one hand on the child's hair without looking down. I said, "Pop, the coordinates. Oates gave them to you 37 years ago. Do you trust them?" Pop thought for a long time. "I trust Gerald Oates," he said. "I didn't know him well, but the ones who were uncomfortable with what we were doing, and there were a few, were the ones I'd bet my life on. He was uncomfortable." "Then I think we plan for the move," I said. "And I think we plan for it in 3 days. Day 15. Planning. Planning. My head is full of sequences. Route to the coordinates. 40 to 45 miles west, through the Allegheny foothills. Roads we don't know the current state of. One truck with good capacity. One truck with some issues I've been tracking. The Chevy has a rough idle at low speed that Floyd says is carburetor related and that we can manage, but should monitor. 23 people. 23 people in 2 trucks across 45 miles of unknown road. The math on that is, we can fit 8 people per truck in an absolute emergency. More in the beds with supplies reduced. 2 trips? 3? No. 2 trips means leaving 12 people in the bunker while 6 go. And the turnaround time, and the fuel expenditure, and the exposure risk makes that unsustainable. 1 trip, 23 people in 2 trucks, beds loaded with supplies and people. Necessary. Irene and Cal Garland spent the morning going through every supply item in the bunker and categorizing it by weight, volume, and necessity. I didn't ask them to do this. They just did it and handed me the list. The list was organized in a way I would have organized it. I looked at Cal with new respect. He shrugged and said his dad had been having him do inventory for the construction business since he was 12. Pete, apparently, is better at logistics than he is at letting other people think. Kathleen put together a medical go bag, the essentials, portable, nothing that requires power. She said, "If someone has a cardiac event on the road, I can do basic intervention, but not much. I want to flag that as a risk." I said, "Noted," and thought about Pop's beta blockers in the medical kit. I thought about how 4 feet of concrete had been protecting him from stress for 2 weeks, and what 45 miles of open road was going to feel like. I went to Pop. I said, "Tell me honestly, can you make a 45-mile trip?" He was at the radio desk. He took off the headphones and looked at me. "Yes," he said, "and honestly." A pause. "I can make it," he said. "I'm not going to claim I'll be jogging by the end, but I can make it." I said, "You'll be in the cab, not the bed." "I know." He looked at the headphones in his hands. Henry went quiet. "When?" "Last broadcast was 18 hours ago. I've been trying to reach him on the hour." He set the headphones down. "I don't think he's coming back." Henry Braddock, 41. Former park ranger, alone in a house in Waynesboro with a dog and a shortwave radio and enough supplies for a while, broadcasting every 6 hours because structure helps and because someone should know what's happening out there. I said, "I'm sorry." Pop said, "We go in 2 days." Day 16. I used the day to prepare the vehicles and to finalize the route. The trucks, Floyd and Pete went over both of them. Fluids checked, tires inspected, the Chevy's carb issue cleaned as well as possible with what we had on hand. We transferred remaining diesel from the bunker to the truck tank using a siphon hand pump. Both trucks are now as full as they're going to be. The route, I've been drawing it on a piece of Grange Hall paper with a black marker. using Pop's memory of the local roads, and a paper map that Ray had in his truck's glove compartment. No GPS. Both phones are dead. And frankly, I don't think the satellites can be counted on anymore. The paper map is a county road map from maybe 2014. Slightly out of date, but the roads don't change much in rural Virginia. We go west on the farm roads, avoiding the interstate entirely. Cross the county line on 250, swing south to pick up a Forest Service road that Pop knows, something his grandfather used to use for timber hauling that's not on most maps. That road takes us up into the foothills and should, if it still exists and is passable, bring us to within 10 miles of the coordinates. The last 10 miles is the unknown. Mountain terrain, forest roads, possibly collapsed or overgrown. Harlan, Pete's neighbor, the one with the infected gash on his forehead that Kathleen cleaned up on day 10, has been recovering steadily. His wound is closing clean, no sign of spreading infection, no behavioral changes, normal temperature. By day 16, he's quiet but functional. He's the group's strongest physical presence, and I want him available if we need someone to move something heavy on the road. Robert's arm is holding. He's been doing what he can with one useful limb, which turns out to be quite a bit. Dennis Pryor has been getting steadily better, physically. The burns are healing. He's been spending time with the younger children, talking quietly, sometimes reading to them from a novel somebody had in their bag, a thriller, somewhat inappropriate for children, but apparently it held their attention, and I noticed he was good with them in the unconscious way that people who've spent professional time with children often are. Everyone is scared of leaving. I can see it in the specific way people move around the bunker now. Careful, close to the walls, touching things, like they're memorizing the space. Donna cried last night, quietly, in her corner. Ray held her hand and didn't say anything, just held her hand, which is sometimes the only right thing. I sat with Pop tonight after the generator went off, just the two of us in the dark with a battery lantern. He said, "I want to tell you something about this bunker." I said, "Okay." The first year I was building it, your grandmother didn't know. I was doing it in sections, coming out here in the evenings, a few hours at a time, digging by hand, mostly, then renting equipment when I needed it, and telling her it was for the irrigation. He was quiet. When she found out, when I had to show her the door in the root cellar because I'd gotten far enough that hiding it was impossible, she didn't speak to me for 3 days. And then she came to me on the 4th day and said, "Gene, if you're going to build a hole in the ground, you're going to do it right." And she went through the supply list and improved everything I'd planned. He smiled, and I could see it in the lantern light. The water system was her idea. The composting bathroom, the medical kit. She had better instincts for survival than I did. She just needed to be told what we were surviving. I said, "She sounds like she was something." "She was," he said. "She would have liked you better if she'd known you better. You have the same quality she did. You work at the level of what's actually needed, rather than what looks like something's being done." He paused. "That's a compliment, from her and from me." I didn't know what to say. I said, "Thank you." He said, "Get some sleep." Day 17, the night before. Pop made the last real meal from the bunker stores. Beef stew, canned beef, canned tomatoes, dried onion, the last of the dried herbs from the tin Beverly had grabbed. He cooked it on the 2-burner camp stove, and we ate it in shifts, 19 people, and then the last 4, and nobody complained about the order or the portions. Pete's son Cal had said yesterday, to me, not to Pete, that he was afraid his dad would do something dumb on the road, that his dad's instinct when scared was to push into whatever he was scared of rather than think it through. I said, "I know. I'm putting him in the Chevy with Floyd. Floyd is good at managing people who need managing." Cal looked at me like he hadn't expected me to have thought about it. "Okay," he said. "Yeah. Irene and Cal have been doing something with the radio in the last 2 days. They don't ask permission for things, which means they're doing things before I can tell them not to, which is probably the right strategy. What they've been doing is triangulating, as best they can with our equipment, the source of the tone signal, the oral vector signal, to use the phrase from 1987. It's imprecise work on a shortwave without the right instruments. but they've been doing it systematically, making notes, adjusting the antenna angle, and recording signal strength. Irene came to me this afternoon with a piece of paper. She said, "Best estimate, the signal is coming from somewhere northwest of us. Maybe 20, 25 miles. There's a narrow range of possibilities and they all cluster around the same general area." I looked at the paper. The general area she was indicating was, roughly, in the direction of the Allegheny foothills, in the direction we were already planning to go. In the vicinity, possibly, of the coordinates on Pop's sheet. I looked at her. She said, "I know." I sat with that for a while, and then I went to Pop and told him. He looked at the paper for a long time. "The signal could be defensive," he said. "If there's a community up there, moving the infected away from them, using the sound system to steer them south, away from the mountains. It could be. Or," he said, and stopped. "Or," I said. We both left the alternative unstated for a while. Then Pop said, "Oates was a decent man. I believed that." "Okay," I said. "I believe it now." "Okay," I said again. "We're going." Day 18. Departure. We came out of the bunker at 5:43 in the morning. I went up first, alone. Checked the yard, checked the northwest corner, checked the line of sight to the barn and the driveway. Clear. 2 infected visible at the far end of the pasture, moving vaguely east, not near us. I went back and signaled. They came up in groups of 4, quiet, moving to the trucks. Beverly had given everyone specific instructions about noise. Keep bags tight, no metal on metal clinking. Take off anything that swings or rattles. She'd gone through the children's bags the night before, removing anything that made sound. It was thorough in the way a kindergarten teacher approaches a field trip to a museum, which is to say, completely thorough. Loading took 8 minutes. I'd assigned seats before we came out. Our truck, me driving, Pop in the passenger seat, Donna and Ray in the back seat, 3 others in the bed with the supply bags, the Chevy, Floyd driving, Pete, Kathleen, Cora and her granddaughter, 4 more in the bed. Dennis rode with Floyd because he'd been quiet lately, in a way that suggested he needed to be near someone with Floyd's kind of steadiness. Harlan rode in our bed, he'd asked to, and his reasoning was that he was the person most likely to need to get out and deal with something physical, and the bed was faster to exit. Irene and Cal split between trucks. Irene came with us. We drove out of Pop's driveway at 5:51 in the morning, and I didn't look back at the farmhouse. Pop did. I felt him turn and look. I didn't say anything. The first 8 miles were the best we'd get. The farm roads were clear. The sky was just going from black to gray, that thin early morning light that makes everything look slightly underwater. We ran the headlights on low. The Chevy followed 20 meters back. Nobody talked. Mile 8, the county road intersection. We slowed. A truck was sideways in the intersection. Pickup, windows blown out, driver's door hanging open. Recent, from the look of the upholstery. Floyd and I both stopped and assessed from the cabs, and there was enough room to go around the nose of it on the left shoulder. Rough ground, but not impassable. We went around. Mile 11, the first real problem. A section of the county road where a culvert had failed. The roadbed had softened and partially collapsed, and the pavement had cracked and dropped 1.5 feet on the right side. A standard vehicle would crack an axle. I stopped and got out and walked it. The left side held, barely, but it held. We went through at a crawl, right wheels up on the shoulder, left wheels on the intact section. The truck scraped the undercarriage once, and I felt it through the seat. Held. The Chevy scraped worse. It made a sound I didn't like. Floyd said it was fine. I had to take his word for it. Mile 14, we hit 250. Route 250 is a state road, which meant better pavement, which meant more traffic, which meant more abandoned vehicles, and more of the other kind. There were 9 of them on the road when we came onto it, spread across about 100 yards of the eastbound lane. 7 on the pavement, 2 on the shoulder. I said to Pop, "Time?" He looked at his watch. 6:14. Light enough to see, but early enough that they'd been wherever they were all night. meaning they were wherever they defaulted to without stimulus. We hadn't triggered their attention yet. I kept the truck at walking pace, below what the engine wanted to idle at, almost, coasting. They tracked the headlights slightly. You could see them turn their heads, but none of them converged on us. We went through them at 4 miles an hour. In the rearview mirror, I saw the Chevy doing the same. One of them on the shoulder reached toward the truck as it passed, that slow reaching motion, and Floyd's passenger mirror caught it and bumped it aside, and they were through. I let out a breath. Pop said, without particular inflection, "That was the worst stretch until the forest road. After we find the cutoff, it gets clearer." He knows these roads. Every back way, every timber track, every family road that has no formal name on any map. It took me about the first 4 days of working his land to realize that his knowledge of this geography is so deep, it might as well be anatomical. He knows the contours the way you know your own house in the dark. He directed me from memory for the next 6 miles. A right at a fence post with a particular shape, a left at the second cattle guard, through a gate, and the gate was, thank God, unlocked, because the family that owns this land apparently doesn't lock it, and onto a gravel track that wound up through hardwood forest. The forest road was rough, but passable. 3 places where fallen branches had to be moved. Harlan dealt with those without being asked, out of the truck bed and back in under 2 minutes each time. And one section where the track narrowed and the brush had grown over it, and I worried about the trucks getting through. But Pop said keep going, and I kept going, and the brush scraped the sides and then opened up again. Halfway up the forest road, maybe 20 miles from Pop's farm, we found the convoy. Military vehicles, 4 of them, 2 Humvees and 2 larger trucks, parked nose to tail along the right side of the forest track, in the trees but not hidden. Just stopped. I braked. The Chevy stopped behind me. I looked at Pop. He looked at the vehicles. "Engines?" he said. I didn't hear engines. The vehicles were cold. I got out. The Humvees were empty. The cab of the first transport truck was empty. The second transport truck had a canvas cover on the back, and I approached it from the side, staying out of the direct sightline of the cab, and looked through the gap in the canvas at the rear. Empty. I looked at the vehicles for a while. There was a smell, not the infected smell. Something different, more like old oil and propellant. The smell of equipment that's been run hard and then stopped. The tires on the front Humvee were muddy. The mud was partially dry, meaning they'd been here a while but not many hours. No blood, no sign of struggle, no weapons left behind. They'd parked here deliberately and gone somewhere on foot. The forest is thick here. The road rises toward the ridge, another 3 or 4 miles. If you were moving a unit into the mountains on foot, you'd leave the vehicles somewhere accessible but off the main terrain, somewhere you could return to if you needed them. Pete was out of the Chevy, coming up beside me. He said, "That's military hardware." "I know." "That's good," he said. "That means—" "Pete," I said, "go back to the truck." He started to say something else. I said his name again, quietly, and he read something in my face and went back to the truck. We drove past the parked convoy. I kept watching the tree lines on both sides. Nothing moved. The forest road crested the ridge at about 8:30 in the morning, and the view from the top. I'm going to try to describe this without reaching for anything it isn't. The Allegheny foothills from the ridge crest at roughly 2,000 feet, layers of mountain extending west and north, covered in the full autumn of September, orange and red and yellow where deciduous trees are turning, dark green where the conifers stay, a sky that was fully light now, high, thin clouds, no smoke visible in this direction. And in the valley below the western slope, between the ridge and the next rise, buildings. Not ruined, not burning. Buildings with activity around them. I could see vehicles moving, the specific purposeful movement of things that are being operated. A complex of some kind, low profile, functional, not the kind of thing you'd notice from the air or from a map. Pop said, "Yes." Just that, yes, like he'd been holding that word in reserve. I said, "Is this?" "I think so," he said. "I've been trying to place it from the description Oates gave me. He said you'd see it from a high point. He said it wouldn't look like what you expected. He looked at the valley for a long time. He was right." I keyed the radio. Cora's group in the Chevy. "You're seeing this?" Floyd's voice. "We're seeing it." We go down. The descent took 40 minutes on a switchback road that was not designed for 2 trucks but tolerated us. At the bottom, a security checkpoint. Not military, or not standard military. 3 men and 2 women, armed with hunting rifles and in civilian clothes, behind a pole barrier across the road. They saw us coming and prepared without panicking, which was either good training or experience. I stopped the truck and rolled the window down and put both hands on the door frame where they could see them. A woman came to my window, probably 50, weathered face, careful eyes. She said, "Where are you coming from?" I said, "A farm about 40 miles east. We have 23 people." She looked at me and then at Pop. "How long have you been on the road?" "Since before dawn." "Any injuries? Anyone symptomatic?" "One person with healing arm burns from ground chemical exposure. One person with a healing arm fracture, splinted and recovering well. No bites, no fever, no behavioral changes." She studied me. Then she said, "Who sent you here?" "No one recently," I said. "My grandfather had coordinates. From a man named Gerald Oates." She went very still. She said, "Say that name again." "Gerald Oates. 1987. He gave coordinates to my grandfather during a project in Augusta County." She turned around and said something to the other people at the checkpoint that I couldn't hear. One of them went at a run toward the main building. She turned back to me. She said, "Wait here, please. 5 minutes." The 5 minutes was actually 12 minutes. The person who came out was a man in his 60s, moving fast for his age, in the specific way Pop moves fast when something is actually urgent. He was wearing work clothes and glasses, and he had the look of someone who has been not sleeping regularly for a while. He came to my window. He said, "I'm James Oates." I said, "Gerald Oates's son," he said. "My father died in 2019. He gave me this location when I was 19 years old and told me that if things ever became like they did in 1987, I needed to be here. He told me about a man named Holt, a civilian engineer from Western Virginia." He looked past me to Pop. "Sir," Pop's voice was very quiet, "your father was a good man." "He thought the same of you," James Oates said. "He kept a list of the people he trusted. Your grandfather's name was on it." We stayed in that silence for a moment. James Oates said, "We have room. We've been expecting people from the east. We've been steering the infected away from the approach roads for the last 5 days." He said it matter-of-factly, the way you describe something you've been doing as a job. "It's a frequency system. My father built the prototype in 1988. We've been operating an updated version since day 1. I said, "The tones. You're moving them south, away from the populated valleys. There's a ravine system south of here. The infected collect there, and the terrain keeps them contained. It's not a permanent solution." He said it without any pretense that it was. "But it's bought us time. How many people do you have here?" 82, as of this morning. Medical staff, engineers, farmers, people my father spent 20 years finding and telling the same thing he told your grandfather." I looked at him. "Gerald Oates told my father 45 years ago," I said. "About 1987, about the pathogen, about what might happen again." "Yes," James said. "He spent the rest of his life making sure it wouldn't happen the same way twice." He said it without drama. It was just a fact. I thought about the closed folder in Pop's filing cabinet, the government document, the 11 people in the 1987 project who were removed from the containment zone, a man named Oates, who was uncomfortable with how things were being handled. He went home and spent the rest of his life. I said to Pop, without looking away from James Oates, "You said Oates was one of the good ones." Pop said, "I was right." They drove us down to the main compound in 3 utility vehicles, while Floyd and Pete brought the trucks. The compound is an old agricultural research station. The buildings have the utilitarian concrete look of federal construction from the 60s, but they've been expanded and modified, and there's a newer structure at the south end that's clearly more recent construction. Good ventilation. A water system that James says draws from a spring-fed reservoir above the property. A power setup that's solar and battery, not generator, which means it's quiet and sustainable. Kathleen walked through the medical space with the on-site doctor, a woman named Susan Pratt who'd spent 20 years in wilderness medicine and had been brought in by Gerald Oates through James a decade ago, and came back looking like she'd inhaled for the first time in 2 weeks. Robert's arm was reassessed. The Chevy's carburetor issue was diagnosed as fixable by 2 mechanics the facility employed. Irene found what she described as an actual library in the main building and went inside and didn't come back out for 3 hours. Dennis Pryor sat in the courtyard in the morning light for a long time. Just sat there. I sat with him for a while. He said, "Is this real?" I said, "I think so." He said, "I drove a school bus for 15 years. I know every kid's name on my route." 42 kids. He was looking at the grass. "I don't know what happened to any of them." I didn't say anything. "I know that's not a question you can answer," he said. "No," I said. "I'm sorry. The bus is still on Route 33, he said. "I left it there on day 1. He paused. "It has a stop sign arm on the side, a little orange flag that goes out when you open the doors." He paused again. "I keep thinking about it sitting there. The flag. Still out, maybe." I sat with him for another few minutes, and then I went to find Pop. Pop was in the main building. James Oates had taken him inside to a room that serves as a kind of archive. Documents, records, Gerald Oates' own notebooks from the 1987 project and after, a life's work of preparation and documentation laid out in filing cabinets and on shelves. Pop was sitting at a table looking at something Gerald Oates had written. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Pop said, without looking up. He wrote it all down. Everything from 1987. Everything he did after. He tried to get the information to people who could use it. Journalists, scientists, even a congressman once. He turned a page. He got nowhere most of the time. But he didn't stop. I said, "He spent his whole life on it." "He did." Pop set the notebook down. "He came from the same thing I came from and made a different choice." He said it without self-pity, just as an observation. I don't know if his choice made more difference than mine eventually. He built this. I built a bunker. He was quiet. Maybe together those were both necessary. I sat down across from him. "How are you feeling?" I said. "Tired," he said. "Like a machine that's been run past its rating for 2 weeks and is settling back to idle." He almost smiled. "I'm not going to die today, Garrett." "I know. But I want to say something while I'm thinking clearly and while you're sitting still for a moment." "Okay. What happened between me and your father?" he said. "The years of it. The silence. I regret all of it. Not just my part of it, although my part of it was considerable, but the time, the years. What a waste of the time we had." He looked at me steadily. "Don't do that. Whatever the equivalent of that is in your life. Don't spend years not saying the thing to the people you should say it to. It doesn't resolve itself on its own. It just becomes a thing that's there when the person is gone." I said, "Are you talking about Pam?" He blinked. "Who's Pam?" "My girlfriend. We broke up in February. I stopped. "I still have her coffee mug in my truck." Pop looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I was actually talking about me, about whether you and I would do this differently going forward." I said, "Oh, but also yes," he said. "Probably call Pam, or don't if she's not the right person. But know the difference before you decide." I said, "The mug is in the truck, which is in the parking area," he said. "Yeah? Well," he said, "you'll figure it out." Day 19 at the compound. I've been helping James Oates' engineering team for the past 2 days, assessing the water distribution system and looking at the foundation of the newer building, which has some cracking at the southwest corner that suggests differential settlement and needs to be watched. James asked me to stay on, not as a guest, as part of the operation. He said they'd been short on structural and civil engineers since the outbreak, and there was enough work to keep 3 people busy indefinitely. He said the same to Floyd about vehicle mechanics, and to Kathleen about medical support, and to Pete about construction. Pete, to his credit, said yes immediately, and then immediately started telling the head of construction what he thought should be done differently about the tool organization. The head of construction, a quiet woman named Allison, who'd been managing the site for 8 years, listened to Pete for about 90 seconds, and then told him specifically and politely where the tools lived and why, and Pete shut up and listened, which was the most useful thing Pete has done in 3 weeks. Ray and Donna are talking about what's next. They're from here, from this part of Virginia, and they have roots in this land that don't translate easily into staying somewhere. Ray keeps looking north in the same way Pop looked back at the farmhouse. I don't say anything about it. Cora's granddaughter has found 2 other children close to her age. Yesterday afternoon they were playing something in the courtyard that involved elaborate rules I couldn't follow from a distance. Irene has not come out of the library in any extended sense. She comes out to eat and sleep and then goes back. James told me there are technical documents in there that belong to Gerald Oates. Engineering specs for the frequency system, ecological analyses of the surrounding terrain, medical documentation from 1987 and after. I told James about the way she and Cal had triangulated the signal source. He looked at me like something had connected. He said, "How old is she?" I said, 16. He said, "In the 1987 project, Gerald Oates was 23. He was the youngest person on the containment team by a decade." He said it like he was working out a math problem. He used to say, the people most useful in a crisis were always the ones nobody thought to include. Day 21. I need to put one last thing on record. Not because it resolves anything, because it doesn't, but because incomplete records are how things get lost. 2 days ago, Irene found something in Gerald Oates's files. A report, partial. The last several pages are missing. From a follow-up investigation he'd commissioned in 1995 using a contact in a university microbiology department. The report is about the pathogen from 1987 and its possible evolution in an uncontrolled environment. The conclusion of the partial report, before the missing pages, is that if the 1987 pathogen were to re-emerge in an evolved form, after incubating in the wild for a generation, its vector properties would be significantly more efficient. The transmission rate would be higher, the incubation period for symptomatic presentation would be different, and the asymptomatic carrier rate, the proportion of exposed individuals who carry it without developing full symptoms, might be substantially higher than what was observed in 1987. What this means: a lot of people might be carrying this pathogen right now who don't know it, who are infected but not sick, who won't turn but who can transmit. Maybe not indefinitely. The report speculates about immune response timelines, but long enough to matter. It means the blood tests at the Verona checkpoint were testing for something real, asymptomatic carriers. It means Dennis Pryor might test positive. It means some percentage of the people in this compound might test positive. It means whoever was running that checkpoint knew, or believed they knew, something about the spread of this outbreak that we don't fully understand yet. And it means Gerald Oates knew about this possibility 20 years before any of us were in a bunker counting canned beans. It means James Oates's compound, the medical team, the testing they're doing quietly and voluntarily with the survivors here, is asking the same question the checkpoint was asking, with the difference that the answer here doesn't lead to a decision about removing people. The 2 missing pages might have a conclusion. James is trying to find if there are copies anywhere in the files. I don't know what they'd say. I've started to realize that the thing about an engineering problem, any engineering problem, is that understanding the failure mode doesn't mean you have the repair solution. You can map the crack in the foundation with perfect accuracy and still not know if the building stands. What you do is keep watching it, keep taking measurements, keep being present in the building while it sorts out whether it holds. Day with 23. Pop is in the medical facility, not emergency. Susan Pratt wanted to do a proper cardiac evaluation now that they have the equipment, and Pop agreed to it, which surprised me, and then didn't when I thought about it. He agreed, because he's not afraid of information. He's spent 37 years sitting with terrible information and doing what he could with it. A cardiac workup doesn't change the category of things he's been carrying. I sat outside the medical building this afternoon in a folding chair in the thin autumn sun and thought about the last 23 days in some kind of order. The irrigation channels on Pop's farm, the ones I was there to assess, the clay substrate that's shifted and created blockages in the gravity system. I made most of my field notes during the first 5 days, and they're in my notebook, which I brought down to the bunker and which came with me in the truck. I could still write that report. There's something about that, about the report that still exists to be written about a thing that still needs fixing, that I find useful to think about. The East Pasture drainage problem didn't stop being a problem because the world changed around it. At some point, someone will want to know how to fix it. I'll write the report. Cora came and sat down next to me for a while. She didn't say anything. She had a cup of tea, and I had the last of the instant coffee from what I'd brought in my bag, and we sat in the sun and drank them. Eventually, she said, "What do you think is going to happen, long term?" I said, "I'm not qualified to say. I know. I'm not asking for expertise. I'm asking what you think." I thought about it. "I think this is going to be a long time," I said. "The outbreak. I don't think it's going to be over in 3 weeks, like 1987. I think the people who say it'll burn itself out in a month don't understand exponential spread in an uncontrolled environment." I paused. "But I think there are things that work in our favor. Rural areas are better positioned than cities. Communities with preparation are better positioned than communities without it. People who are thinking clearly are better positioned than people who are panicking." I looked at the compound. "And Oates spent 40 years making sure this place existed." Cora said, "Is that enough?" I said, "I don't know. I hope it's part of enough." She nodded, drank her tea. She said, "My husband would have thought this was interesting. He was an engineer too, civil, like you. He died 8 years ago. I'm sorry." "He would have liked you," she said. "He liked people who thought about systems." I said, "I like people who run things calmly when everyone else is not calm." She smiled at that. "We're a useful pair then." "Yes," I said. Day 25. James Oates found the missing pages. They were in a separate folder, misfiled in the ecological analysis section, because Gerald Oates apparently had a complicated personal filing system that James has been deciphering for years. The conclusion of the 1995 report is, the pathogen, if it re-emerged in an evolved form, would likely self-limit within a certain time frame due to the biology of the infected host. Without the capacity for complex behavior, without the ability to find shelter, to eat, to protect themselves from exposure, the infected cannot sustain indefinitely. They're burning through cellular function faster than it can sustain itself. The report estimated a natural die-off period of 60 to 90 days from the point of peak spread, for the evolved form, assuming no further active spread. Assuming the asymptomatic carrier transmission rate diminishes naturally as immune response develops. 60 to 90 days. We have been in this situation for 25 days. That means, if the 1995 analysis is right, we are somewhere between a third and halfway through the active period. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I went and told Pop. He was in a chair by the window of the medical facility room they'd put him in for observation. His cardiac evaluation came back with what Susan Pratt described as manageable findings. The medication was right. The underlying condition was being controlled. There was a procedure she wanted him to consider that would make things significantly better, which he could think about. He was sitting in the chair reading one of Gerald Oates's notebooks when I came in. I told him 60 to 90 days. He looked out the window for a long time. He said, "Gerald wrote this down in 1995 and didn't tell anyone who might have used it to make decisions differently." "Maybe he tried," I said. "Maybe no one would listen. Maybe." He turned the notebook over in his hands. Or maybe he knew that telling people the crisis would eventually end, before it began, would make them less likely to prepare for it. I thought about that. "Is that why you didn't tell my father?" I said. "About what you'd seen in 1987. Because telling him it was coming eventually, but not now, would have made him less likely to take it seriously." Pop looked at me. "No," he said. "I didn't tell him because I was ashamed." "Right," I said. "But it's an interesting observation anyway." He set the notebook down. "You've gotten better at the right questions." "I had a good teacher," I said, meaning the last 25 days, meaning all of it. He knew what I meant. Something I want to put down before I forget it, or before the small things that felt important in the moment get smoothed over by time and distance. Day 9, when I woke up at 3 in the morning to silence from above and called Henry Braddock on the shortwave, and he described the infected moving south in a column, 60, 70 of them, all going together. I was scared in a way I hadn't been yet. Not the fear of the immediate physical threat, which is a clean and navigable fear. The other kind. The kind that comes from understanding that something larger than your personal situation is happening, that the scale of it is beyond what any individual choice or skill can address, and that all the careful planning in the world might just be rearranging furniture in a room that's already on fire. That fear is a specific thing, and it doesn't resolve. You just learn to work alongside it. On day 14, when Floyd said, "Let's not talk about the barn," I understood exactly what he meant. There are things you file and don't open, not because they don't matter, but because opening them in the middle of a task that requires your full attention is how the task fails. On day 17, when Pop made the last beef stew from the bunker stores and 19 people ate it in shifts, Beverly put a sprig of something, a dried herb she'd saved from the tin all the way through, on each bowl. Not enough to taste, really. Just there. Irene asked her why, and Beverly said, "Because we can." And that was the whole answer. Day 18, when we came out of the bunker at dawn and the air hit my face after 17 days of mechanical ventilation and recycled concrete smell. I am not going to make that into more than it was. It just felt like air, like the actual world. My eyes were wrong for about 10 minutes from the light. The child in the yellow dress. I'm still thinking about her. The look on her face wasn't fear, and wasn't confusion. It was something else. I keep coming back to the possibility that she understood more than we thought. That she saw whatever she saw behind us. The compound direction, probably. The ridge we came from. And knew that she was going a different way already, and our offer of help wasn't what she needed. Or she was lost and frightened, and we left her there. I have to live with both possibilities. I don't know which one is true. I don't think I'm going to find out. Day 28. James Oates has been broadcasting on the safe zone frequency for 4 days now, on a low-power band that doesn't reach far enough to attract attention from the wrong directions. He's been broadcasting the coordinates, encrypted, but Oates's encryption is a simple enough system that people with the right context can read it. People like the people Gerald Oates spent 20 years finding and telling where to come. 3 more groups have arrived in the last 4 days. A family of 6 from Rockbridge County, who found their way here through a combination of their own preparation and what James calls extraordinary luck. A group of 9 from a farm collective east of here, led by a woman named Deb, who reminds me of Cora enough that the first time I saw them together, I nearly said something dumb about it. 7 people from a church in Highland County, who had a radio operator among them who'd been scanning shortwave frequencies since day 1. Total, 112 people in the compound as of this morning. The Chevy's carb is fixed. Both trucks are serviced. Floyd and the facility mechanics have been going over them together for the last 3 days, and what started as Floyd showing them how to address the specific issue became an informal class on vehicle maintenance under resource constraints, which Floyd approaches with the same quiet competence he approaches everything. Pete organized the tool room. He did it without being asked. It took him a day and a half. Allison inspected his work and said it was good, and Pete, who had expected pushback, looked genuinely pleased. Robert's arm, in its second proper splint with Kathleen's expert guidance, is on track to heal clean. Harlan's forehead wound is fully closed and shows no signs of deeper infection. He volunteered for perimeter duty and has been doing it for 4 days, which has been mentioned to me more than once by the people on perimeter, as an example of someone pulling more than their weight. Dennis Pryor tested negative on the pathogen screening. His chemical burns are healing. He's been spending time in the facility's communication room, learning the shortwave system, and James says he has an instinct for it. He has an instinct for patterns, James said. Driving the same routes for 15 years, you learn to read subtle information, the shape of traffic, what's different about today versus yesterday. He reads frequencies the same way. I thought about 42 kids whose names he knew. The bus sitting on Route 33 with the stop sign arm out. I thought about how the skills that make you good at one thing often translate sideways into something you couldn't have predicted. Day 30. I went back to the truck today to get my notebook, the survey notebook from Pop's farm, the one with my irrigation assessment notes, and I saw the coffee mug in the passenger seat. Pam's coffee mug, the one I've been driving around with for 7 months, since February. It's a white mug with a chip on the handle that was there when she gave it to me, meaning it was already old when it became mine. She got it at a hospital fundraiser, and it has the hospital's name on it in a font that was probably chosen by committee. I picked it up and looked at it for a while. I put it in my jacket pocket. I don't know what that means exactly. I don't have a working phone, and I don't know if the phone infrastructure will come back in 60 days, or 60 years, or some other number, and I don't know what I'd say to Pam if I did have a way to reach her. I don't know if she's okay. I think the area of North Carolina she's from is one of the regions that's been less affected, based on the regional map James's team has been building from radio contacts, but I don't know for certain. What I know is, I took the mug out of the truck. That's a decision. It's not a large decision, but it feels like one. Pop would probably say that's sufficient for now. Day 32. I've been running a calculation for 3 days that I want to put down. The 60 to 90-day die-off estimate from Gerald Oates' 1995 report assumes no active spread, which assumes the infected are not creating new infections at a meaningful rate. But that assumes the transmission vector is primarily bite-based, which is what the 1987 project observed. The asymptomatic carrier component, people who are infected but not turning, who carry and potentially transmit before immune response clears the pathogen, complicates this. If those people are transmitting to others, creating new exposures that then produce new turnings, the die-off timeline extends. We've been testing everyone who comes to the compound, voluntary but strongly encouraged. The testing uses a method Susan Pratt adapted from a protocol she found in Gerald Oates' medical documentation, a specific antibody test that can detect the pathogen's markers. Of 112 people, 14 have tested positive. All 14 are asymptomatic and appear healthy. 3 of those 14 were confirmed to have had bite exposure. 11 were not, meaning 11 people in our compound are carrying something they caught from ambient exposure or contact they weren't aware of. All 14 are being monitored. None of them are being removed from anything. They're here, eating meals with everyone, contributing to the compound's work. Susan Pratt is tracking their immune response over time, and her preliminary reading is that the immune system is clearing the pathogen in most of them, slowly, over weeks, but clearing it. That's the crucial piece. The immune response works. The body fights it off in people who don't turn, and the pathogen loses. Which means the 60 to 90-day estimate might be correct, if enough people develop natural immunity fast enough. If the immune response is self-propagating through a population the way normal immune response is, which means, possibly, that the people at the Verona checkpoint who were testing positive and being removed were not dangerous long-term vectors. They were in the early stages of a natural immune process that would eventually clear the pathogen on its own. I spent a long time thinking about this, about what it means for the people who were taken from that checkpoint, about the people who made that decision. I don't know the scale. I don't know how many checkpoints there were. I don't know if what Dennis Pryor heard was the beginning of something systematic, or a local decision by someone who didn't have the full information. I know what Pop would say, that not having the full information is what happens when you spend 40 years classifying the partial information you have. I'm going to write up what Gerald Oates' report says, and what Susan Pratt's testing shows, and what James's frequency logs reveal about the die-off trajectory, and I'm going to put it with Gerald Oates's archive in the filing system. Because incomplete records are how things get lost. And because whatever comes after this, the people who come after are going to need to understand it better than we do. Day 35. Pop asked me to go for a walk with him this morning. We went up the hill behind the compound, a trail that curves through the hardwood forest and tops out at a clearing, where you can see the valley and the ridge beyond it and, in the other direction, the mountains going west into haze. It took us 40 minutes at Pop's pace, which is the right pace for the terrain. At the clearing, he sat on a flat rock, and I sat on the ground next to him, and we looked at the mountains. He said, "I've been thinking about the irrigation channels." I said, "On your farm?" "Yes. The blockages you were assessing. You had a plan for them." I did, rerouting the intake structure and cleaning out the secondary channels, maybe installing a sediment catch upstream. I thought about my notes in the notebook in my jacket. It's a 2-week job, maybe 3, depending on equipment access. He looked at the mountains. "When this is done," he said. "When this is done," I said. It's a specific kind of statement, when this is done. It assumes it ends. It assumes there's a point at which we go back and fix what needed fixing before, which also needs fixing after. It's either the most optimistic thing you can say, or it's practical engineering thinking. You assess the load, you determine the repair, you schedule the work for when conditions allow. I like to think it's both. "There's also the roof on the barn," Pop said. "It's been needing attention for 2 years." "I noticed," I said. "I keep putting it off. You've been busy building a bunker and saving 23 people." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "There's always an excuse." "We'll fix the roof," I said. He looked at me. The morning light was coming sideways through the trees, the specific quality of October morning light that makes everything look slightly gold and slightly sad. He looked older in it, and also, I don't know, complete, maybe, like a man who has done the work he set out to do and is resting before the next work. He said, "You'll be all right, Garrett." I said, "I know. I mean in general," he said. "Not just here. In general. You'll be all right." I said, "You too, Pop." He looked at the mountains. "Yes," he said. "I think I will." I've been thinking about what to say to close this recording out, and I haven't come up with anything that doesn't sound like a summary. And summaries are, I've been told, not the right ending. So instead, let me just say what's actually true right now. It's day 35. The compound has 112 people in it. The infected in the valley south of here are diminishing. The perimeter team has been counting and logging, and the numbers are trending down, which is either the die-off beginning or seasonal behavior, or wishful thinking, and we don't know yet. The frequency signal is still running, but James is planning to reduce it as the infected density decreases, the same way you taper medication as the condition improves. Irene is building something. I don't know exactly what yet. She's been in the technical section of the library for a week, and she's got Cal helping her, and they've been pulling specifications from Gerald Oates's frequency system documentation. When I asked her what she was working on, she said, "A better version." I believe her. Pop is managing his heart condition with Susan Pratt's guidance, and is looking, honestly, better than he has in weeks. Being useful helps him. Being in a place where his knowledge matters, where 37 years of thinking about this problem is an asset, rather than something he carried alone, helps him. Floyd fixed the Chevy clean. He says it'll run another 100,000 miles. The coffee mug is on the shelf above my cot. I don't know what I'm going to do about Pam when the infrastructure exists to do something. I know I'm going to do something. That feels like enough of a decision for now. The child in the yellow dress. I keep coming back to her. She keeps standing in the middle of the county road in the gray morning light, looking past us at something behind us. She keeps walking off the road into the ditch. I don't know who she was. I don't know where she went. The rational explanation is that she was frightened and nonverbal from shock, and went in the direction that felt safe to her, and that direction was away from 2 trucks full of strangers on a rural road. That's the rational explanation, and I believe it. I also keep thinking about the way she looked at whatever was behind us. Not scared, not confused. Thinking. The day we drove that road, we were coming from east of the ridge, heading west toward the compound. Whatever she was looking at was west, which was where we were going, which she had no way of knowing. I'm going to stop thinking about that now. Or I'm going to try. The recorder is almost out of battery. James's team has a charger that will work with it, but I'm not going to charge it today. I'm going to let the battery run down naturally, and then charge it and start a new recording that will probably be more practical. Structural assessments, resource inventories, things that someone reading this after the fact can actually use. This recording is for me. The practical ones will be for whoever comes next. I'm going to go find Pop and see if he wants to walk back down the hill together. The morning is cold. The trees are full color now. The mountains going west are exactly the same mountains they were 35 days ago, before any of this, which I find not comforting exactly, but stable. Reliable in the way geological things are reliable. They were here before us, and will be here after, and we are animals on their slopes trying to figure out how to stay. The recording ends here. One more thing. I went back to the filing cabinet in the archive room last night after everyone was asleep. Gerald Oates's documents. I was looking for the intake structure specifications for the frequency system, for Irene's project. I found, in the back of the last drawer, a single index card in an envelope. On the card, in handwriting I didn't recognize until James told me later it was Gerald Oates's, a list of names, maybe 40 names, people's names, nothing else. No addresses, no context, no explanation. The last name on the list is Eugene Holt. And above it, with a small check mark in pencil next to the name, a name I recognized from nothing Pop had told me, because Pop hadn't been the one to put it there. James told me his father had kept this list for 30 years, the names of the people he'd trusted, the people he'd told, the people he believed would do the right thing with what they knew, if the time came. He'd been checking names off the list for the last few years. The ones he'd confirmed were still alive, still in the same locations, still positioned to do what he'd hoped. Pop's name had a check mark next to it. James told me his father had made a trip to Western Virginia in the spring of 2017, a quiet visit, just checking. I asked James if he knew what Oates had seen that gave him the confidence to put that mark there. He said, "My father told me the man still had the bunker. Still maintained it, still believed it would be needed." He paused. He said that was enough. I thought about Pop in 2017, 68 years old, Edna gone for 6 years by then, restocking the bunker alone, taking inventory on a yellow legal sheet, checking the generator, replacing the water pump seal. A man who made a wrong choice once, in 1987, and spent the next 30 years in the practical work of making it count for something. Gerald Oates drove out to check on him and went home satisfied. I think about that. I think about what it means to spend years doing a thing in silence that no one around you understands, because you've seen something they haven't seen, and you can't unknow it, and you can't stop acting on what you know, even when the acting looks like eccentricity, or obsession, or fear. I think about my grandmother Edna saying, "If you're going to build a hole in the ground, build it right," and then designing the water system. I think about Irene in the library, building a better version of something she only learned existed 2 weeks ago. I think about Dennis Pryor learning to read shortwave frequencies the way he learned to read traffic patterns on 42 kids' routes. I think about the roof on Pop's barn. That's where I stop. That's where the recording ends.